Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. My grandfather Walt lived about 15 miles outside Tonopah, Nevada. Dry patch of land off a 2-lane highway, trailer backed up against a few acres of sagebrush and dust. I spent 2 summers out there with him when I was a kid, then again for a couple weeks after college, mostly helping him fix up a busted well pump and paint the deck. He wasn't much for stories, but he had this one thing he told me. Quiet-like, when we were out walking past the old chicken coop one night. He said, "About once a month, maybe more, there's lights that come over the ridge. Not planes. They don't make a sound. They stop and sit there like they're looking." That was it. No big setup, no warning. Just said it like it was something he accepted a long time ago. I laughed a little, thought maybe he meant flares or drones or whatever, but he just shook his head and said, "You'll see if you stay long enough." I was 24 that summer. It was early August, hot enough in the day that you couldn't touch the metal railing on the porch. Nights were nice though. Real still, real quiet. You could hear coyotes yipping way off near the hills. Maybe the occasional car roaring by on 95. But otherwise, it was just crickets and wind. I stayed up late most nights reading or poking around his tool shed, organizing stuff he'd never use again. I didn't think about what he said until about a week in on a Tuesday night. I'd gone out after dinner to sit in one of those cheap plastic lawn chairs by the fire pit. No fire going, just wanted to cool off. Sky was crystal clear, full spread of stars above me like someone threw salt across black velvet. Then I saw something. At first I thought it was a plane way out past the hills to the northwest, but it didn't blink, didn't move like a plane. It just hovered. A little ball of soft yellow light, maybe the size of a pencil eraser at arm's length. I watched it for a full minute before I called for Walt. He didn't come out, probably asleep already, so I grabbed the binoculars we kept by the back door. Even zoomed in, it didn't look like anything solid. Just a glow, sort of pulsing, but real slow and even. After about 5 minutes, a second one appeared, maybe half a mile to the left of the first. Same brightness, same size. Then a third, lower down. They didn't move, didn't shift positions or get closer, just sat there. I must have watched them for half an hour. They didn't make a sound, not even the static buzz you sometimes get with high-altitude aircraft. Then, just as suddenly as they came, they went out, all 3 within a second of each other. No dimming, no movement, just gone. The next morning, I told Walt what I'd seen. He nodded like he already knew, said they'd been doing that for years. "You watch long enough," he said. "They'll start moving. You don't want that." I didn't ask what he meant by that. A few nights later, I think it was Friday, I went out again, this time with a notebook and a cheap little field recorder I'd brought from school. I sat in the same chair by the fire pit and waited. Nothing at first, just stars and desert wind. Around midnight, I saw the lights again. This time, there were 4 of them, spaced wider apart. One a little lower than the rest, almost dipping behind the ridge. They were brighter now. Not blinding, but enough to cast a faint yellow glow on the tops of the hills. I don't know how high they were. Hard to judge distance in a place that flat. I hit record on the mic and whispered the time. 12:07 a.m. For about 10 minutes, the lights just hovered. Same pulsing glow, no sound. Then, slow, smooth, the highest one started moving. Not toward me, not away. Just sideways. Then it stopped. Another one dipped lower, almost behind the hill. I thought it was going to disappear, but it held there, right above the ridgeline. Then they all started to drift, real slow, to the east. Not in a straight line, more like they were circling something I couldn't see. No flashing, no noise. I felt this weird pressure in my chest watching them, like my lungs were heavy. Not fear exactly, more like being underwater. When they finally faded out, it wasn't like before. They didn't blink off. They just got dimmer and dimmer until I couldn't tell if they were gone or if my eyes were playing tricks. I stayed out another half hour listening. Didn't hear anything unusual, just wind through the dry grass, maybe an owl. The next day I played back the recording. My voice came through saying the time and then 30 minutes of desert noise. No strange sounds, no low hum or static or anything mechanical, just silence. Walt didn't want to talk about it after that. I brought it up again once, and he just said, "Don't look too long. Some things don't like being seen." I let it go. The last night I was there, maybe 2 days before I drove back to Reno, I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to this faint flicker coming through the window. Not flashing, not constant, just a slow pulse, like lightning far away but without the thunder. I got up, went to the front door, and stepped out barefoot onto the porch. The sky was clear, stars everywhere. But the lights were back, closer this time. Maybe 5 of them, hovering low behind the shed out past the chicken wire fence. Not on the property, but close enough that I could see the light glint off the old rusted tools Walt kept piled out back. They didn't move. Didn't flicker this time either. Just hovered there. I watched for maybe 2 minutes before one of them tilted, not sideways, but like it turned to face something. Then the others followed, not turning in sync. It looked organic, almost like they were reacting to something. Then I heard this. I don't know what to call it. A thump, a deep sound, but not loud. More like something heavy landing far off, except nothing shook. It only happened once. After that, the lights drifted upward, real slow, and one by one they dimmed into the sky. That was the last time I saw them. Walt passed 2 years later. I went back for the funeral, stayed in a motel in town. His trailer sat empty after that. Someone eventually bought the land, maybe to build a solar array or something. I haven't been back since. Sometimes I look up satellite maps of the area. The hills are still there, the same stretch of road, the same ridgeline where I saw the lights. Nothing shows up in the photos though, just empty desert. I was living alone back then, about 6 miles outside Amargosa Valley, just off Valley View Road. Middle of nowhere, basically. Closest neighbor was a retired guy named Dennis who lived about a quarter mile down the dirt track. The kind of place where you keep your windows shut when the wind kicks up because the dust gets in everything. It was quiet though, too quiet, sometimes. My house was this old single wide on cinder blocks, nothing fancy. I'd moved out there after my divorce because it was cheap and I could bring my dog, Maisie. She's a mutt, mostly shepherd, maybe some lab. Sweet dog, usually pretty fearless. Chased off coyotes more than once. So it surprised me when I found her hiding in the closet one night, shaking like a leaf. That was the second week of September. Weather was still hot during the day, but it cooled off fast after sundown. I remember because I just put a fan away that morning. I'd been watching TV, something dumb, can't remember what, when I heard this low thump against the back wall of the trailer. Not loud, more like a vibration. I muted the volume, waited, and didn't hear anything else. Figured it might have been the fridge cycling or a rabbit under the porch. A couple minutes later, I noticed Maisie wasn't on the couch. She's usually right at my feet. I got up, called her name, didn't hear the jingle of her collar or anything. I checked the kitchen, then the bathroom. Found her in the bedroom, jammed into the back of the closet, tail curled under her and panting hard. When I knelt down, she wouldn't come out. Her ears were flat, and she kept glancing up toward the ceiling, like she was tracking something I couldn't see. I tried coaxing her with a treat, even grabbed her leash, but she just whined and pushed herself further into the corner. That's when I noticed the air in the room felt weird. Warmer than the rest of the house, even though I hadn't touched the thermostat, and it smelled faintly metallic, like a wet penny. I left her there and went to the back door to check outside. It was around 9:45 p.m. No wind. Dead still. When I stepped out onto the porch, I got hit with this heavy pressure, like the air had thickened, almost like humidity, but dry. My arms broke out in goosebumps, and the little hairs on my neck stood straight up. And then I heard it. A low hum, steady and deep, coming from the sky. It didn't vibrate the ground or rattle anything, but I could feel it in my chest. Like standing too close to a big speaker. No direction to it, just everywhere. I looked up. The stars were visible, but a patch of sky directly overhead looked off. Not cloudy, not darker, just sort of blurred. Like heat waves coming off asphalt, except it was night and there was no heat. That shimmer hovered in place, maybe the size of a football field. It didn't move, didn't pulse, just hung there while the hum got slightly louder. I backed up to the door, trying not to blink. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe 30 seconds, maybe longer. Then, out of nowhere, the humming stopped. Cut off clean, like someone threw a switch. The shimmer above me flickered, literally flickered, like a bad projection, then vanished. Not flew away, just gone. Right after that, Maisie started barking like crazy from the closet. I went back inside and found her standing up, still in the closet, but looking toward the door now. She came out on her own and pressed against my legs. I kept petting her, trying to calm her down, but she kept glancing toward the windows. I didn't sleep much that night, neither did Maisie. She paced the hall back and forth until close to dawn. I left the bedroom light on, something I never do. Every time I started to drift off, I'd swear I heard that humming again, way off in the distance, but when I sat up, it was dead silent. Next day, I drove into town to pick up some groceries and get out of the house. Ran into Dennis at the gas station, and I asked him, casually, if he'd heard anything weird the night before. He gave me this long look and just said, "That time of year," and walked off. I didn't press it. Later that week, I noticed something else. My porch thermometer, this little analog one I keep nailed to the post, was busted. The needle was stuck pointing all the way past the high end like it had spun too far. I tapped it, tried to reset it, nothing. Replaced it 2 days later. Maisie was back to normal by then. Still a little skittish at night, but not hiding anymore. The next time I took her out in the yard after dark, though, she wouldn't step past the porch. Just stood there with her nose in the air, tail stiff, like she was waiting for something. I didn't force her. I didn't see or hear anything after that. But every now and then, if I'm out late walking around back, I swear the air goes quiet in that same way. Too quiet. Like even the bugs and night birds are waiting for something to pass overhead. I'd had my amateur radio license about 2 years when this happened. I'm not some genius engineer. I work at a tire shop outside Lincoln, Nebraska, but I've always been into shortwave and scanning odd frequencies. Built my own rig with a Yaesu FT991A and an SDR dongle plugged into an old HP laptop. It sat in my garage along with a vertical antenna I mounted to the roof. It's just something I messed with on nights I couldn't sleep. That was most nights, to be honest. The signal showed up in late February when the weather was bouncing between snow and rain and everything felt half frozen. I was scanning around 29 megahertz, trying to pull in some skip from the west coast, when I noticed this pulsing sound right around 29.574. It wasn't voice, and it wasn't the usual Morse bursts. It came in 5 pulses, like DNNNDN, not digital, not analog. Just 5 uniform tones in a row, spaced out and maybe every 8 or 9 seconds. The pattern repeated for nearly 6 minutes. I thought maybe it was some kind of telemetry or maybe a stuck repeater, but it didn't match anything I'd heard before. I logged it, saved the SDR capture, and moved on. Next night, same time, around 2:30 a.m., the signal came back. Same pattern, same tones. I recorded again. On the third night, it changed. Still 5 pulses, but the spacing got tighter, closer to 7 seconds between sets. And the last pulse in each group stretched a little longer, just barely, like it was leaning into something. I started to get a weird feeling about it. I don't know how to describe it. The way you feel when you know someone's watching you even though you're alone. I kept looking out the garage windows. It was dead quiet outside, just frozen grass and the sound of wind through the eaves. I made a new folder on my laptop for the files and labeled it 29574 odd. I copied all 3 recordings into it and backed them up on a USB stick, just in case. That night, I posted the spectrogram image and a clip of the audio to a ham radio forum. Just asked if anyone else had heard something like it. A guy from Oregon replied maybe an hour later, said he'd caught the same tones on 29.577 the night before, but only for 2 minutes. I asked him for a recording, he said he'd check. He never replied again. On the 4th night, I stayed up and set the recorder to auto capture. I didn't hear anything at 2:30 or 3. I gave up and went inside around 3:45. Nothing happened. At 4:07 a.m., the rig turned on by itself. I know that sounds impossible. I'd shut the software, exited the interface, but I saw it in the logs later. It powered up, tuned to 29.574 oitint, and started recording. The signal lasted 14 minutes. It had changed again. Still 5 tones, but they'd lost their sharp edges. More organic somehow. The pulses were closer together now, almost overlapping, like breathing. The next morning, when I checked the laptop, the SDR program was still open. The timestamp was right there in the session logs. Capture start 0473. The folder was empty, not even an empty file shell. I figured I'd somehow saved it elsewhere by accident. I checked the main drive, my backup stick, the recycle bin. Nothing. When I went back to the garage after work that night, the folder I'd made, the one called 29574 odd, was gone. Gone. Just like it had never existed. I checked the system restore point. No record of deletion. I ran recovery software. It pulled up some old Excel docs I hadn't touched in months, but not one trace of any WAV or FLAC files from the last week. I unplugged the laptop and left it sitting on the floor. The next night, I used a separate recorder, an old Tascam handheld I'd used back in college. I set it to record straight from the speaker and ran the radio on battery. I didn't want anything connected to the laptop. At 2:38 a.m., the signal came through. I was in the garage with the door open to the backyard, wrapped in a blanket. Wind was coming in light from the northwest. The sky was clear, stars out, Orion straight overhead. The Tascam recorded 10 minutes of signal before it stopped. Just stopped. Battery was fine. The display said rec, but the file it saved was 0 bytes. Not corrupted, just empty. That's when I started hearing the tone outside. Not from the speaker, from the air. It was faint, but it had that same pulsing rhythm. 5 notes. Soft. From the direction of the soybean fields behind my fence. Like it was playing just over the ridge behind the trees. I stood in the grass and held my breath. It wasn't wind. It wasn't crickets. There was frost on the shed and on the grass under my slippers. I walked maybe 10 steps out into the yard, and the pulsing faded. I waited. It came back. Closer. I went back inside. The next morning, my radio was detuned. The dial showed 29.574 but the waterfall was empty, just static. I reset the device, reconnected the SDR, and scanned the entire 10-meter band. Nothing. I posted on the forum again. The original post was gone. Not removed, just missing. The thread had vanished, along with the Oregon guy's reply. I searched his username. No account. That night, I left everything off. No radio, no recorder. I stayed in bed with the windows shut and curtains closed. At 2:30, the tone started again. Not from a speaker. From the house. It was coming through the walls. 5 soft pulses, a short pause, 5 more. It sounded like it was inside the pipes or the ductwork. I got up and checked the thermostat, the water heater, even the fridge. Nothing mechanical matched it. I stood in the kitchen for a while, not sure what to do. The sound wasn't loud. It just felt like it was waiting. It stopped around 3 a.m. I took the antenna down the next morning, packed up the rig, and put everything in a tote in the garage. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard the signal since. But every night around 2:30, my laptop wakes itself up. The screen stays black, but the fan kicks on. Just for a minute, then it powers back down. My girlfriend Megan booked the place. I'd never even heard of Rachel, Nevada, until we pulled off the 375. The extraterrestrial highway signs were cute in a kind of gimmicky way, but I figured it'd just be another boring stretch of desert. We'd been on a road trip from Phoenix up to Reno, mostly just for the hell of it. Hit a few ghost towns, hike around Zion, maybe try our luck at the tables for a night. Rachel was a stopover. One night. The motel was called the Moonlight Motor Inn, a row of 6 rooms shaped like a trailer from the 70s, all parked facing a cracked lot and miles of open desert. Nearest anything else was a dusty diner across the road, which looked like it hadn't changed since 1982. We checked in around 6:30, just before sunset. The guy at the front desk, older, white beard, wore a patch that said Randy, handed us a real key on a blue plastic tag. He asked where we were headed, and when I said Reno, he nodded like I'd told him we were driving to the moon. I remember he said, "You kids staying just the one night? That's smart." Then he kind of hesitated, looked out the window behind me, and added, "Don't go wandering after dark." I laughed. figured he meant like coyotes or snakes or whatever. Megan didn't even hear him. She was already walking toward the room. The place was surprisingly clean inside. Stained carpet, sure, but the sheets looked fresh. There was a little table by the window, a bulky old TV, a humming mini fridge, and not much else. We dumped our backpacks and walked over to the diner while the sky turned that bright orange you only get in the desert. Dinner was basic: burgers, fries, watery coffee. The only other people there were a couple truckers playing cards in the back. The jukebox played Patsy Cline on a loop. When we asked for the check, the waitress smiled, but it was the kind of smile where the eyes don't match. Like she'd heard the same joke 1,000 times. Back at the motel around 8:15, we cracked a couple beers and sat on the curb outside the room. It had cooled down fast. Still warm, but the breeze had picked up and the stars were coming out. I don't usually notice stuff like that, but out there, it was stupid how clear the sky was. You could see the Milky Way like someone had poured salt across black velvet. We weren't even talking, just sitting there watching the sky. Megan pointed out a few constellations. She knows that stuff better than me, and I spotted a couple satellites drifting past. Everything was dead silent except for the occasional gust of wind. Around 9, maybe a little later, Megan asked, "What's that one?" I followed where she was pointing, low in the sky, just above the hills to the south. At first I thought it was a plane. Just a bright white light, steady, no blinking. It wasn't moving, not fast anyway. I said probably some aircraft from the base. I was mostly guessing. We weren't far from Groom Lake, so it made sense, but it didn't move. Not for a long time. I kept expecting it to drift like the others, or blink or shift color, but it just hung there, perfectly still. Megan thought maybe it was a star, but it wasn't in any of the usual spots and it wasn't twinkling. Then it started to rise. Not diagonally like a plane taking off, just straight up. Smooth, controlled, too fast for a balloon or drone. Maybe a few hundred feet, maybe more. Hard to tell with no point of reference. We both stood up. Megan was squinting. I remember her saying, "That's not right." Then it split. 1 second, it was a single white dot. The next, there were two, side by side, about a thumb's width apart if you held your hand up to the sky. No flash, no flare, just a clean separation. The second light hadn't moved into view. It had come from the first. We stood there frozen, not sure what we were even looking at. Both lights hovered for maybe 10 seconds. Then, and this is the part that still messes with me, they blinked out. Not faded, not flew off, just gone, like flipping off a switch. No contrail, no sound, no afterglow. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. I looked over at Megan. She wasn't blinking, just staring at where they'd been. I asked, "Did you see that?" She nodded. "Yeah." We stood there another few minutes waiting for them to come back. They didn't. I scanned the sky. No planes, no satellites, just stars and more stars. We went inside around 9:30. I locked the door, which I never bother with at motels, and we didn't talk much after that. Megan sat on the edge of the bed, quiet. I turned on the TV for noise, but all we got was static. The screen flickered, then turned blue. No signal. I figured the place just didn't pay for cable anymore. Tried my phone, no bars, not even one. Megan checked hers, same. The signal hadn't dropped earlier. I'd gotten texts from my brother when we were at the diner. We left the TV on anyway, just for the light. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up. She was standing by the window. I asked what was wrong and she whispered, "Something's out there." I got up and looked. Nothing but dark desert and the faint outline of the hills. The security light above our room was flickering, but it had been doing that earlier too. Then I saw it. Not in the sky, on the ground, way out past the lot, maybe 100 yards into the scrub. A faint glow, like someone holding a flashlight, but the light didn't spread. It just sat there, perfectly round, maybe the size of a softball. Megan said, "It's moving." And it was, drifting, slowly, just above the ground. No beam, no footsteps, just a silent white sphere, gliding left to right in a straight line. Then it stopped, hovered. I shut the curtain. We didn't sleep. Just sat there in the blue TV light, not saying much. At some point the signal came back and a news anchor's voice filled the room, but I didn't pay attention to what he was saying. By morning, everything looked normal. Sky was pale blue. The diner had fresh coffee. The same two truckers were still there, playing cards like they hadn't moved. We checked out around 8. Randy was gone. Some woman in her 40s sat at the desk and gave us a polite smile like we'd never met before. As we pulled out of the lot, I looked back. Nothing in the sky, nothing in the hills. But the TV signal stayed strong the rest of the trip, and the stars never looked that clear again. I worked at Dugway for 4 years. I wasn't some high-clearance scientist or anything like that, just a facility tech, part of the civilian support crew. My job was mostly infrastructure, HVAC, electrical routing, pressure systems, backup power, that kind of thing. The base is huge and mostly dead quiet. Lots of empty buildings, long hallways, places you never see anyone. Most of the people working there kept to themselves, and even if you were on the same shift, it wasn't like anyone volunteered much personal info. I spent the bulk of my time in Sector 3, older part of the facility, partially underground. Concrete corridors, reinforced doors, no windows. It wasn't classified, technically. We were told it was a backup command area in case of major infrastructure failure above ground. But I only ever saw 1 or 2 guys actually using the comms room. There were never drills. There was something weird about Sector 3, though. Every night, somewhere around 200, there'd be this low thump. Not loud, not enough to shake anything, but deep, felt more than heard. I used to call it the pulse. First time I noticed it, I was alone in the sub-level hallway, checking coolant lines for one of the old generator panels. It was completely silent down there. No humming vents, no echo. I was crouched with a flashlight in my mouth when I felt it. Just a single slow thud, like someone dropped a 100-pound weight a couple floors down. Not sharp, not violent, just this heavy, deliberate pressure. I stood up and waited. Nothing followed. I figured it was maybe seismic. The base is in the desert or something with the plumbing. But then it happened again the next night. Same time. I started keeping track. Over the next 2 weeks, I made sure to be in the same hallway during that Euro 200 window. The pulse happened every single night. Always one single thud. Sometimes it was fainter, sometimes stronger. Once it came twice in a row, about 10 seconds apart. It didn't feel like machinery. I know the difference. Pumps cycle. Generators hum. Compressors click in and out. This was different. It felt organic, like a breath or a heartbeat. I asked around a little, carefully. The guy I was replacing, Don Merritt, had been there 6 years before he transferred out to Sandia. I emailed him and asked, off the record, if he'd ever noticed anything strange in Sector 3 at night. He replied with one line, "Stay out of the lower corridor behind Panel 17. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up. Thing is, there was a narrow hallway behind Panel 17. I'd walked past it dozens of times, but never had reason to go down there. It wasn't on my route. The panel itself was just old electrical, junction box with conduit running up and across. The hallway behind it wasn't lit. The next night I brought a thermal sensor with me, just handheld, nothing fancy. Figured if something was producing that kind of energy, or pressure, or whatever, maybe it had a heat signature. At a 1:58, I was standing at the mouth of the Panel 17 corridor, sensor powered on. It was cold down there. Usually stayed around 66 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, but the hallway was 60 and dropping. No moving air. Then, right on time, the pulse hit. The sensor didn't spike, exactly, it rippled. Like something big shifted below the floor, radiating a temperature difference in a ring pattern. I watched the center go cold, 56, 54, 52, then warm again. It was like a wave passed through the concrete. And then at the very edge of the sensor's range, about 20 feet down the corridor, I saw movement. Just a flicker, a shift in the heat signature. No shape, no form. Just a dip in the cold pattern. Like something stepped across the floor and blocked the ambient chill for half a second. I stood there a long time, not breathing. Nothing else moved. After about a minute, I backed away and went back to the main corridor. I didn't report anything. Who would I tell? The people who would care already knew. A week later, I had to replace a pressure regulator that fed coolant to that same junction box. It meant cutting flow, depressurizing the line, removing the old valve, and swapping in the new one. It should have taken 30 minutes tops. As I was tightening the lower coupling, I felt the pulse again. I checked my watch. 0143. Too early. This time, it wasn't just one. The floor pulsed again at 0146, then again at 150. My ears started ringing, a low, metallic tone like feedback from an old CRT. I stood up fast and grabbed my flashlight. There was something about the air. It was dense, heavier, like humidity but dry. I couldn't hear my own breathing clearly, like the pressure had shifted. Then I heard footsteps, not boots, not the hard clack of dress shoes, just soft, slow steps, maybe barefoot, echoing faintly down the dark hallway behind panel 17. I turned toward it, light raised. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing moved. The pressure in the air eased. My ears stopped ringing. I finished the job and left. I started sleeping in my truck during overnights after that. No one noticed. We barely had supervisors on the night crew, and I still logged all my maintenance. I made sure to be outside during that 0200 window. On my last month at Dugway, a new guy named Bryce got assigned to my shift. Young, sharp, probably ex-Air Force. I didn't say anything at first, but on his second week, he asked if the base had an underground lab. I asked why. He said, "Every night around 2, I feel something in the walls, like a low hum." I didn't answer. The day I left my badge and key card on the desk, as instructed. My personal locker was clean, nothing missing, but the paneling on the wall behind it, concrete and aluminum, had faint marks. Not scratches, not writing, just indentations, circular, evenly spaced, maybe 5 inches wide. Like something inside the wall had been pushing outward, slowly. No one ever mentioned it. I moved to Montana after that. Got a job in civil works. No more underground shifts, no more pulses. But sometimes, in the early morning, just as the sun's rising, I swear I feel it. In the ground beneath my feet, like something deep below is still breathing. I was stationed at a small radar facility outside Minot, North Dakota back in 2006. Not the main Air Force base. This was one of those satellite installations nobody really talks about. Just 3 concrete buildings, a perimeter fence, and a bunch of radio towers pointing every direction. Most nights were dead quiet. Snow half the year, wind the rest. I was 27, ex-Navy, working contract as a comms tech. The kind of job where you sit in a chair for 12 hours and maybe get up twice, just monitoring systems, checking logs, keeping everything running. 4 of us on rotation, 2 inside the ops trailer, 2 in the maintenance building. Nights were usually just me and a guy named Cole Varga. He was older, Army background, I think, quiet type. Never talked about himself unless you asked directly. The first time it happened, I didn't even notice. It was late January, around 2 a.m., and we were midway through a blizzard warning. Visibility was crap. I was logging routine static bursts on one of the long-range bands when Cole came in from his smoke break looking weird. He stood by the door, brushing snow off his jacket, and said, "You feel that?" I said, "Feel what?" He looked out the window, then glanced at the wall clock. "Never mind," he said. "Happens sometimes, usually Wednesdays." I thought he was just messing with me. Guys get bored, say weird stuff. But the next week, same shift, same time, he asked again, "You hear anything?" I said no, just the wind. He shook his head. Shouldn't even be that. He told me without looking up from his screen that every Wednesday at 2:13 a.m., the sky above the site went quiet. That was the word he used. Not dark, not empty, quiet. Like the whole thing, stars, clouds, satellites, got turned off for a few seconds. Said it started after some equipment was swapped out in late 2004. New tower, new dish. No explanation. I asked what he meant by quiet, and he said, "You'll know it when it happens." Third week, I stepped outside to check the tower lights like I was supposed to. It was cold enough to freeze the hair inside your nose, so I didn't linger. But just as I turned back toward the door, I realized the wind had stopped. Like, completely. I looked up, the stars were gone. All of them, no clouds, no haze, just black. It wasn't overcast, it was like someone put a lid over the sky. I held my breath, listening. No hum from the towers, no rustle from the snow-covered grass. Even the power lines weren't buzzing. Just this crushing silence, like being deep underwater. It lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Then everything came back. Wind hit my face, antennas whined. A few stars reappeared. I went back inside. Cole didn't say anything at first. Then he looked up from his coffee and said, "See what I mean?" I didn't know what to say. I told him maybe it was cloud cover. He laughed once and said, "Clouds don't kill EM bleed. Not like that." The next few weeks, I started checking the time. I'd go outside around 2:10 every Wednesday just to see, and it happened. Not always the same, but close enough. Once, all the exterior lights dimmed like a brownout, but only for a few seconds. Another time, I saw a shape, long and flat, blocking out the stars directly above the far tower. No sound, no movement, then gone. By March, I started noticing other things. One night, the seismic sensors we had buried behind the generator shed registered 3 massive pressure spikes, like something enormous passed overhead at low altitude. Nothing visual, just that same dead silence and then a return to normal. Cole marked the logs like usual, but didn't flag it. He said, "Command doesn't want it flagged." I asked who told him that, and he just shrugged. People up the chain. April, we had a systems check scheduled during that window. Base wanted a full diagnostic of the dish relays, so we had both of us in the ops trailer watching signal returns. Right on time, 2:13, all outbound frequencies spiked into the red for about 4 seconds. Incoming dropped to 0. Just a flat line across every band. Then the screens blinked twice and reset like nothing happened. Cole leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "That's new," he said. That same night, the backup clocks jumped forward by 3 minutes. Main clock stayed the same. GPS sync showed no error. But I watched the digital readouts change. Not slowly, not a glitch. Just straight from 2:14 to 2:17. We had to recalibrate them manually. Cole logged it, but again, no flags. The weirdest part came in late May. It was still cold, snow melting off in patches, and I'd gotten in the habit of bringing a camera out during those early morning checks. Just a basic DSLR with night mode. That night, I set it on a tripod near the eastern fence. Pointing straight up, I triggered a 10-second exposure at exactly 2:12:50 a.m. After the silence passed, I went back to check the shot. Looked normal at first. Then I zoomed in. There was something faint near the center. Not a dot, not a streak, more like a smudge, like a shadow burned into the image. Long and wide and slightly curved, no lights, no definition, but it was there. I tried another shot, same angle, nothing. I showed it to Cole the next night. He stared at it for a long time and said, "You keep that off any network, just in case." June was my last month there. I'd already put in my transfer papers. I didn't tell anyone outside the site about what I'd seen. Not because I thought it was classified, but because I didn't know how to explain it. You start trying to describe silence to someone who's never heard real silence, and they just nod along. My last Wednesday shift, I went out early. Sat on the hood of the truck with a thermos and watched the sky. At 2:13, everything stopped again. Not just sound, movement, wind, insects. Even the clouds that had been slowly drifting west just paused. I looked straight up, and I swear for a second I saw it. Not the shape, but the absence. A part of the sky that didn't match the rest, like a patch of different black, darker somehow. Then it moved, sliding west without making a sound, and the world came back online. I didn't say anything to Cole, just went back inside and finished my shift. A week later, I was in Seattle, working IT at a drone testing facility. Nothing strange ever happened there. I still have the photo. Kept it on a USB drive, never uploaded. The camera's long gone. I don't show it to people, it doesn't prove anything, just a blur against a black sky. But every once in a while, when I wake up around 2 in the morning, I step outside and look up, and I listen. I was up in the Cascades that night, just outside Winthrop. Dry air, no moon, hardly a wisp of cloud. I'd taken the week off from work and brought my old Canon up to this pull-off spot about 10 minutes up Forest Road 37. I'd been there before. There's a small clearing off to the right, past the ditch, where you can set up a tripod without worrying about headlights from the road. I got there just after sunset, ate a sandwich in the driver's seat, drank a bottle of water, waited for the sky to really darken before setting up. Around 9:15, I carried my gear out, tripod, camera, cable release. No telescope, just a wide-angle lens and long exposures. I was mostly shooting for color. Big sky full of stars with the tree line along the bottom of the frame. Nothing fancy. By 10, I had a rhythm going. Set a 2-minute exposure, review, adjust aperture, shoot again. I was getting good noise levels around f4. The temperature dropped fast, probably low 50s, and the air smelled sharp. Pine, dry dirt, a little smoke from distant fires, maybe. Totally silent out there, except for some bugs and the occasional creak from the trees. Around 10:30, I set up for a longer shot, 5 minutes this time. I wanted a slight star trail effect to contrast with the static trees. I clicked the shutter, walked back to my car, and leaned against the hood while I waited. Didn't look at the sky while it exposed, just kind of zoned out listening. No wind, no rustling. Every now and then I'd hear a pop from the forest, like a branch cracking in the distance. Normal stuff. When the timer went off, I walked back to the camera and checked the screen. The first thing I noticed was that the stars looked fine. Nice arcs, good separation. But across the upper left quadrant of the image was a blurred looping shape. A light trail, kind of like a lowercase cursive E flipped on its side. It was too large and too bright to be a bug, and it didn't match the path of any aircraft I've ever seen. I zoomed in. It was a single continuous line, almost white in the middle, fading to bluish at the edges. Perfectly smooth curve, like it was drawn by a compass. No blinking, no tapering at the ends. I looked up at the sky, same area I'd pointed the lens. Nothing there, just stars. I thought maybe it was a drone, but there hadn't been any sound. No hum, no mechanical buzz. And it would have had to move incredibly fast to trace a shape like that in 5 minutes. Fast and silent. I scanned the sky again, then the treetops. Everything was still. I checked the camera settings again, thinking maybe there'd been a shutter error or a flare, but it wasn't overexposed, no lens flare, just that loop. I opened the raw file and tried to adjust the contrast. Didn't help. The shape was solid, not a reflection or a glitch, the kind of thing that should have been visible with the naked eye. I looked around, didn't see anything, but I had the feeling I wasn't alone. Not watched, exactly, just like something was nearby, like standing too close to a live wire, even if you can't see it. I took one more exposure, same settings, same spot, and waited again, this time staring at the patch of sky the camera was aimed at. Nothing moved. No planes, no birds, no flashes. When I checked that frame, it was completely normal. I tried a few more, shifting the tripod slightly each time, all clean. After a while, I packed up, feeling kind of unsettled, but not scared. I drove back to the cabin I'd rented, went to bed around midnight. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I transferred the files to my laptop. The photo with the loop looked even weirder on a big screen. The line had this precise curvature, almost mechanical, and the brightness was consistent all the way through. No motion blur, no change in exposure where it began or ended. It didn't even cross any stars. It passed between them, like it knew where to move to avoid touching anything else in the frame. I showed it to a friend a couple days later, Neil, who used to fly Cessnas out of Yakima. He said, no way that was a plane or a drone. He thought it might have been a satellite flaring, but the loop shape didn't make sense for that. Satellites move in straight lines, not tight spirals. I didn't tell anyone else for a while. Eventually, I posted the photo to a photography forum. Got a few comments about possible lens defects or meteors, but nothing really explained it. One guy said maybe it was ball lightning. Another said it was probably nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. Not when I was standing there. Not when the forest felt like it had gone completely still for those 5 minutes. I've gone back to that spot since then. Twice. Same setup, same gear, same time of night. Never caught anything like that again. Every frame has been clean. I even brought a sound recorder once, left it running for an hour, picked up owls, wind, a coyote maybe. No weird tones, no EMF spikes, nothing unusual. That photo's still on my desktop. I've tried enhancing it, adjusting levels, applying filters. Just makes it look more artificial, like I added the shape in post, which I didn't. It's embedded right there in the raw data. Same as the stars. Same pixel values. It's the only shot from that trip that I didn't post anywhere else. I kept it to myself mostly. Every once in a while I'll stare at it again, just trying to remember if I missed something obvious that night. But I didn't. There was nothing in the sky. Nothing I could see anyway. We were driving out toward Rachel in my dad's old Suburban, trying to make the most out of a 3-day weekend. Just me, my wife Lisa, our 10-year-old daughter Ellie, and my brother Dean, who had flown in from Austin. I'd always wanted to see the black mailbox and maybe camp near the old Little Ale Inn. Not because I'm into aliens or anything, I just like remote places, and I figured the desert would be quiet. We came up from Alamo around noon and got on the 375, the extraterrestrial highway. Road was dead, as expected. Clear skies, no wind, about 84 degrees. I'd filled up at that Sinclair back in Ash Springs, so we were good on gas. Ellie had my phone in the back, playing some kind of game. Lisa was half asleep in the passenger seat. Dean was flipping through the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't static. Right around mile marker 34, something weird came through the speakers. Not music, more like voices. Quiet, distant, kind of overlapping. Dean paused and turned it up. At first I thought it was a foreign talk show, but it didn't sound like any language I recognized. And it wasn't just one station. He kept scanning, and it stayed the same. It'd fade for a second, then come back. Same tone, same rhythm, like it was on top of every channel. Then it cut out completely after we passed mile 35. Total silence, except for the static. Dean looked at me and said, "That was creepy." I didn't say anything. I was watching the rearview mirror. I thought I saw a shimmer behind us, like heat waves, but there was no heat coming off the pavement. It was cool enough that the hood wasn't even radiating. We got to Rachel around 1:30 and pulled into the gravel lot behind the inn. There were a few RVs parked. A couple from Utah who had a telescope set up near the picnic tables, but otherwise the place was dead. Ellie ran around the UFO statue, and we ordered burgers. I asked the woman behind the counter, June, about camping spots without too much wind. She told us about an old cattle turnout a couple miles north that had decent ground and no washout. We set up there around 4 p.m., pitched the tents behind a small rise with a view of the mountains to the west. I could see the dust trail from the highway, but not the road itself. We cooked hot dogs over a camp stove and watched the stars come out. No cell service at all, which was fine. Lisa had a book, Ellie was messing with glow sticks, and Dean and I split a couple beers. Around 8:45, the radio started up again. The same suburban radio we hadn't touched since lunch. The keys weren't even in the ignition. We had everything powered down. But the speakers made this low, faint crackle. Then those voices came through again. Just a whisper at first. Then it rose for about 5 seconds, then dropped back to silence. Ellie said, "Is someone talking?" Dean went over to the car, opened the driver door, and turned the key to accessory. No display. Just black, but the audio was on, no station, just those voices. Still layered, still unintelligible. Lisa came over and leaned in. We all listened for maybe 10 seconds. Then it just stopped again. Dean shut the door and said, "Okay, that's weird." I agreed, but I didn't feel scared. Not yet, just unsettled. Something about the timing, always when we were near that part of the highway or maybe within range of it. We slept okay. The wind picked up a little after midnight, but the tents held fine. No strange lights, no dreams. In the morning, we packed up, drove back into Rachel for coffee, then started heading home the same way we came. And again, right at mile marker 34, the voices came back. Same pattern, a sudden quiet drop in the engine noise, then a rising swell of those strange, overlapping voices. I looked at the dash. The display blinked a few times and reset to 12. Dean didn't touch the tuner, but we could hear it. I slowed down to 45 and kept an eye on the roadside. Ellie said her ears hurt. Lisa looked out the window and whispered, "Do you see that?" I glanced over. About 100 yards out into the desert, there was something dark and narrow sticking up from the sand. I thought it was a pole at first, like a fence post, but it had no shadow. The sun was behind it, low and sharp, and it cast no shadow at all. Dean tried to take a photo, but the screen on his phone stayed black. He hit the button a few times and gave up. Then, as we passed mile marker 35, the voices dropped out again. Silence. The display came back. Lisa leaned back in her seat without saying anything. Ellie started to cry. I pulled over and gave her a Gatorade, and we sat on the shoulder for a while. When we got home, the radio worked fine. Dean's phone rebooted by itself around dinner. Nothing saved from the desert, no photos, no recordings. He swears he tried. 2 weeks later, we were in town, picking up parts for the water heater, When Ellie asked if we were going back to the place with the whisper voices, I said no. She said good. Then she told me that when we passed the marker the last time, she saw someone walking behind the fence line, out in the scrub. Not a car, not a person. She said it walked with its arms straight down and its head too low. I asked why she didn't say anything at the time, and she said she didn't think we'd believe her. She's not the kind of kid who makes stuff up. I never saw it. But I remember the shimmer in the mirror, like heat without heat. And the sound. I can't describe it well. Not words, but not random either. Almost like instructions or warnings, just not in anything I could understand. It didn't feel like radio noise. It felt directed, focused, like it knew we were there. Pulled off I-90 just past Missoula, eastbound. It was one of those unmarked gravel pullouts with a view of nothing but pine and sky. July, mid-afternoon, temperature hovering around 97. My logbook was full for the day, and my eyes had been doing that flutter close thing for the last 30 miles, so I parked the rig, killed the engine, and climbed into the sleeper to grab 30 minutes. I remember checking my watch before laying down, 2:41 p.m. Set an alarm for 3:10. I always set it 29 minutes exactly. Keeps me from falling too deep, too fast. I've done this routine 100 times. Felt like I closed my eyes for maybe 5 seconds. Then I opened them and everything was weirdly quiet. The truck was cold. Not just cooler than before. Cold. I hadn't turned on the AC. The cab lights were off. My phone was black. For a second I thought the battery died, but when I clicked it on, the home screen said 4:08 p.m. That didn't make sense. My alarm never went off and I never sleep longer than 30. I checked my wristwatch. Same time, 4:08. Exactly 1 hour and 27 minutes gone. Still half asleep, I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I forgot to set the alarm or dismissed it in my sleep. But I sat there staring at my phone like it owed me an explanation. I couldn't shake the feeling something was off, like waking up in a room you don't recognize, even though it's yours. Then I noticed the smell. Not bad exactly. Not like smoke or gas, just this sharp metallic tang in the air, like the inside of a brand new radiator. And the cab lights still wouldn't come on. I tried the overhead and the dome, nothing. Battery indicator was fine. Engine turned over normally. I got out to stretch my legs, thinking I must have been more exhausted than I realized. The sun was lower than I expected. Sky, that kind of orange-pink you only get in Montana. I walked around the rig once, just to be sure everything looked right. Trailer doors still locked, tires fine, no signs of anything tampered with, but I kept feeling watched. I know how that sounds, but you spend enough time on the road, alone, in middle of nowhere spots. You learn to trust your gut, that tight feeling at the back of your neck, that pause before turning your back to the trees. I scanned the tree line, maybe 30 yards back from the gravel shoulder. It was dense, mostly pine with some scrub sloped upward toward a ridge. Sunlight filtered through but didn't really light anything. Shadows were long, flickering in the wind, except there wasn't wind. Not even a breeze. No movement in the branches. No birds. No bugs. I don't think I've ever heard Montana so quiet in July. Then I saw something move. Low, just past a deadfall, maybe knee-high. Thought it was an animal at first. A raccoon or a coyote. But it didn't move like that. It was smooth. Almost too smooth. I only caught it for a second before it slipped behind a stump, but something about it didn't register right. I stepped closer to the shoulder, trying to get a better look. That's when I saw the others. 3 of them. Low to the ground, maybe 2 feet tall, spaced apart but moving in sync, like they were flanking something. I couldn't make out faces or details, just small, pale figures half concealed by branches. They weren't walking, more like gliding just above the forest floor. No footsteps, no noise. I froze. My brain kept trying to file them under something familiar. Deer fawns, hikers' kids, pranksters, but nothing fit. The way they moved didn't feel right. No bobbing or shifting, just this straight, steady glide. All 3 turned at the same time, like they knew I was watching. I backed toward the cab, keeping my eyes on the woods. The second I reached for the door handle, my headlights turned on by themselves. High beams. No one in the driver's seat. No one around. The lights flooded the trees and the figures were gone. Just empty forest again. I climbed in and shut the door, locked it, and sat there gripping the steering wheel like an idiot. I kept the engine off and didn't touch anything. I didn't even want to breathe loud. I don't scare easy, but I wasn't about to go wandering into the woods to prove I'd imagined it. After maybe 5 minutes, I got the nerve to start the engine. Everything lit up normally. Dash readouts, GPS, AC, all working. My phone buzzed like it just got service back. No new notifications. I pulled back onto the interstate and drove for 2 straight hours before stopping again. Later that night at a pilot off I-15, I checked my dash cam. I always leave it rolling, even when parked. But that afternoon, from 2:42 to 4:09, it was just static. No video, no error message. File was there, just empty noise. Every other day, before and after, was fine. I thought about telling dispatch, thought about calling someone, but what do you say? Hey, I lost track of time and saw some kids floating in the woods. Didn't seem like the kind of thing you could file a report about. I marked that stretch on my map. Don't stop there anymore. Doesn't matter how tired I am, I'd rather pull off 20 miles further or drive through the night. I kept the dashcam file. Still have it somewhere. Sounds stupid, but sometimes I play it back hoping maybe there's something I missed. A shape, a sound, anything. But it's just static. I was driving west on Highway 36 through Kansas, just past Belleville. This was in late July, 2 summers ago. I was coming back from visiting my cousin in Missouri, spur of the moment thing, and I wanted to make it back to Colorado by morning because I had a shift starting at 8 a.m. at the hospital. I'm a radiology tech. Not super exciting, but I've been doing it long enough that pulling an all-nighter on a road trip didn't feel like a big deal at the time. It was just after 9 p.m. when I left. Sky was still holding a bit of pink in the west, but the air was thick and warm. One of those nights where everything feels kind of soft and slow. I had a few snacks, a Red Bull, music on low. I remember thinking how empty everything felt once I got past the last gas station in Mankato. Nothing but 2-lane road and cornfields, stretching flat in every direction. About an hour in, I saw a light behind me. Not headlights. It was way higher. At first I thought it might be a plane, but it wasn't blinking. Just a steady white point, kind of yellowish around the edges. I watched it in the rear view for a bit. It stayed in the same spot in the mirror, like dead center, not drifting left or right, no matter how much the road curved. I thought maybe it was just an illusion, like Venus or something bright low in the sky. But it felt wrong. I kept driving. 20 minutes later, it was still there. Same size, same spot in the mirror. Not getting smaller like a plane flying away would. Not moving at all, really. I tapped the brakes to slow down and see if the light would move relative to me. It didn't. Stayed fixed in that exact slice of mirror. I rolled down the window and leaned my head out while I drove, trying to look back at it directly, but I couldn't find it with my eyes. It was only visible in the mirror. Every time I craned my neck or twisted around in my seat, it just wasn't there. But the second I looked back in the mirror, boom, there it was. Dead center. That's when I started to feel it. That slow, crawling sensation in your gut. Like your body knows something before your brain does. I turned off the music and just listened. My tires humming on the pavement, a bit of wind, some rattling from the cooler in the back seat. Otherwise, nothing. I turned the mirror up to the ceiling. Couldn't stand looking at it. I kept driving. The road was empty. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind. I passed one little grain elevator with a blinking red light and a sad-looking gas station that was already closed up for the night. Then more cornfields. Then just darkness again. Somewhere outside Norton, maybe 11:30, I stopped at one of those picnic pull-offs. Just a little gravel loop with a trash bin and a metal table under a pavilion. I got out to stretch and pee. While I stood there next to the car, I tried to find the light in the sky again. This time I saw it, faint, directly east, just hovering above the horizon line. Still not blinking, still not moving. I stared at it for a long time, probably 10 minutes. My eyes kept wanting to drift away from it, like it was hard to focus on for more than a few seconds at a time. Like it was boring? That doesn't make sense, but that's the best way I can describe it. My attention kept slipping off it even though I was trying to concentrate. I got back in the car and drove on. About 20 minutes later, I looked at the side mirror, just glanced at it out of habit, and the light was back. Now, slightly brighter, still perfectly centered, still not moving. The car started to feel smaller around me. I could hear every little squeak in the dashboard, every crackle from the tires over rough patches. The air in the cabin felt dense, like I was gaining elevation, even though the terrain was flat. I turned off the AC, rolled down the windows. That's when I noticed something else. There were no bugs. I hadn't hit a single moth or beetle or whatever in almost an hour. Normally, driving through Kansas at night in the summer, you're basically sandblasting your windshield with bugs, but mine was still clear. I turned the rearview mirror back down. The light was bigger, closer. I braked again, just slightly, and watched to see if it would shift, but it didn't. Still locked in place, like it was being projected into the mirror, not actually out there in the sky. I started saying things out loud just to hear my own voice. Stuff like, it's probably just a helicopter, or there's a tower I missed, but none of it made sense. Helicopters move. Towers don't follow you across 2 counties. I pulled off again outside of Oberlin, another rest stop, this one with a bathroom. I sat on the curb next to my car and smoked. I don't even smoke. I found an old pack in the glove box that belonged to my ex and just needed something to do with my hands. I didn't look at the sky. I couldn't bring myself to. After 15 minutes, I got back in the car. I didn't look at the mirror. I adjusted my seat so I couldn't see it even if I wanted to. I drove the rest of the way to the Colorado state line like that. Hunched down, eyes on the road, ignoring the strange weight I felt behind me. By the time I got to home, it was almost 4 in the morning. I parked in the driveway and just sat there for a long time before going inside. The sky looked normal. Light was gone, birds were chirping, a neighbor's sprinklers kicked on. I never saw it again, but for 2.5 hours it followed me. Never speeding up, never slowing down. Just hovering in that same exact spot in the mirror, like it was waiting for something. I was the night guy for a comms outpost up near the edge of Glacier National Park. Nothing glamorous, mostly just routine maintenance, system checks, logging downtime if a relay went out. The place sat about 6 miles off the main road, tucked into the tree line, surrounded by nothing but forest and snowpack half the year. We had generators, backup systems, the whole deal. I was there 5 nights a week, mostly alone. My name's Tom Reyes. I'd been doing the job a little over a year when this happened in late October. Nights were already freezing and we'd gotten a couple early flurries, but the ground hadn't iced up too bad yet. That evening started normal. I drove in just before sunset, maybe 5:45, unlocked the gate, let it close behind me, parked next to the main cabin. There's only one structure, a squat concrete building with a satellite rig out back, 2 generators, and a steel antenna tower about 40 feet tall. No windows. It's secure, but not like Area 51 or anything. Just padlocks, a motion light above the door, and cameras feeding back to the telecom's regional office in Kalispell. Inside, it's just a little kitchen setup, a cot, storage shelves, and then the server equipment, blinking lights, cables, fans humming. I usually spent the night checking voltages, reconfiguring the routers when they dropped out, logging maintenance on a clunky old laptop. That night, around 9 p.m., I stepped outside to get a wrench set from my truck. One of the fans on the tower housing had started to rattle, and I figured I'd tighten the bolts while I had some time. I grabbed the case, plastic black about the size of a briefcase, set it on the gravel by the base of the tower while I checked the fixture. I remember getting distracted because my phone buzzed. A message from my brother, and I went back inside to answer it. I was maybe gone 5 minutes. When I came back out, the case was open. Every tool, wrench, socket, extension was laid out on the gravel in a perfect spiral. It started with the smallest Allen key at the center and worked its way out to the full-length torque wrench on the outside. The spacing between each tool was exact, same curve, same orientation, nothing touching, nothing haphazard, just a clean, intentional shape. I stood there for a long time thinking maybe I was looking at it wrong. Maybe it fell and spilled weird, but the gravel wasn't disturbed. no scatter marks. The case was laid neatly beside the spiral, snapped open, hinges facing south. I looked around. Forest to the east and north, slope rising behind the tower, road back to the gate. No lights, no tracks. Just the crunch of gravel under my boots and the creak of the guy wires swaying a little in the wind. I said out loud, "Okay, what the hell?" just to break the silence. I was the only one with a key to the gate and the building. Cameras outside the cabin never triggered, and there's no cell signal out there strong enough for anyone to live stream a prank or whatever. I crouched down and touched one of the wrenches. It was cold, colder than the others somehow, and a little damp, like it had been sitting out longer than 5 minutes. But I'd just taken it from the truck. The others were dry. I didn't put the tools back right away. I just stood there trying to figure out how long I'd really been inside. I checked my phone, it had been 7 minutes. I checked the timestamps on the log computer when I went back in. My last entry, noting the fan issue, was at 9:12. My reply to my brother was sent at 9:19. It lined up. I thought about calling my supervisor, but what would I even say? Hey, someone rearranged my tools into a pattern. Send help? So I cleaned them up, put everything back in the case, latched it, and brought it inside. I didn't go back out the rest of the night. Around midnight, the generator hiccuped, not fully out, just a brief dip. And when I checked the monitors, the feed from camera 3 was gone. That's the one facing the tower. The others were fine. I rebooted the system, and the feed came back, but the footage between 9:15 and midnight was just gone. No error message. No signal. Just black, like the lens was covered. When I went out the next morning to check the camera, the lens was clean. No frost, no smudges. But the mount had been twisted a few degrees off its bracket. Not enough to change the view, but enough to notice. Like someone had touched it, then put it back. I drove straight to the Kalispell office after my shift ended. I didn't sleep. I showed the footage to Charlie, the tech guy, and he watched it twice without saying anything. Then he asked if I dropped the camera or reconfigured it. I said no. He asked again. I said no again. He told me to let him keep the SD card and offered me a few days off. I didn't argue. When I came back the following Tuesday, the camera was replaced with a newer model, and my old wrench case was missing from the truck. There was a brand new one waiting for me inside. Same brand, fully stocked, arranged alphabetically. I never asked who replaced it. I didn't want to hear the answer. I drove past Groom Lake in late March. I wasn't trying to see anything. I had flown into Vegas for a job interview, and instead of heading straight back to Sacramento, I decided to take the long way home through Tonopah just to get off the interstate. I like weird places, I guess. Not in the conspiracy kind of way, just the quiet, middle-of-nowhere vibe. I had a dash cam running the whole trip. One of those cheap ones from Walmart, records in 5-minute loops that saves everything to a 64 gigabyte card. I bought it mostly for insurance purposes, never had a reason to really look at the footage before. Anyway, the part that matters was late afternoon. Maybe 5:30 p.m. sun was low, but not gone. I was heading south on 375, what they call the extraterrestrial highway. I'd stopped for gas and snacks at that tiny store in Rachel, then kept driving. Not much out there, just long stretches of open desert, low ridges, barbed wire, and the occasional faded warning sign. There was this one spot, maybe 20 minutes past the turnoff, where the road gets close to the perimeter. Not close enough to get in trouble, but close enough you can see the white pickup trucks sitting on the hilltops, just watching. I slowed down a little there just to look. You always hear about the camo dudes, and I figured, why not? I had time. Nothing happened. I didn't stop. Didn't get out. Just rolled by slow, maybe 30 miles an hour. I remember glancing at the hills, thinking I saw a flash of light from a windshield or maybe binoculars. It was gone fast. I kept going. Got to Tonopah around 8, got a burger, checked into a motel. That night, I plugged the dash cam into my laptop just to see if I'd caught any of those trucks in the footage. Just curious. That's when I noticed the gap. There's a 5-minute clip, timestamped 5:24 p.m., where the video looks normal. The sky's kind of golden, the desert's all flat and tan, a couple power poles passing by. Then the next clip starts at 5:29 p.m., but something's wrong. The whole screen is black for the first 14 seconds. Not fuzzy, not corrupted, just pitch black, like the lens was covered. No audio either. Then, out of nowhere, the video cuts back in like nothing happened. Road, desert, same angle, same speed. I watched it 5 times, trying to figure it out. The transition was clean. No digital noise, no jump, just 14 seconds of solid black. Everything else on the card was fine. Every other clip had clean starts and stops with audio. This was the only one with a blackout. I figured maybe the camera glitched, but it didn't skip. The timestamp didn't jump ahead. It ticked through every second from 5:29 to 5:29:14. Then the video came back like normal. The camera thought it was recording the whole time. That bothered me. A glitch would skip, right? Or freeze. But this wasn't a skip. It was just black. I thought maybe it was the sun. Maybe I passed into a shadow or something. But I pulled up the GPS and satellite view, and that stretch of 375 has no overpasses, no tunnels, no tall trees, nothing. Just open sky and low scrubland. The weirdest part was that the scenery didn't change at all between the last frame before the black and the first frame after. Same power pole in the distance. Same curve in the road, like the world stopped moving for those 14 seconds. That bugged me more than anything. I went back and watched the footage from the clip before and after, just in case. In the 5-minute segment before, I noticed something subtle I hadn't caught the first time. Around 5:26, the sunlight changes for a second. Everything gets slightly dimmer, like someone turned down the brightness. Then it fades back in. It's quick. I only noticed because the shadows on the dash shifted, even though the road didn't. In the segment after the blackout at 5:30, the camera picks up this low sound, hard to describe, like a subwoofer hum just at the edge of hearing. It lasts maybe 3 seconds, then fades. I didn't hear it at the time, or if I did, I don't remember. I drove that whole stretch in one go. Never stopped. The odometer didn't show anything weird. I checked the trip log I'd been keeping. Distance matched the map. But I kept thinking about that blackout. Next morning, still in Tonopah, I drove back up the highway. I stopped at the exact stretch where the blackout happened, using the GPS coordinates from the footage. There was nothing there. No marks on the road, no tire tracks, no poles or wires or buildings. Just open dirt on either side, some scrub brush, and a fence way off in the distance. I left the dash cam running again, drove the same direction, same speed, watched the footage that night. No blackout this time. Everything recorded clean. But while scrubbing through, I saw something else I didn't expect. In the same clip, the one recorded that second day, right at 5:29 again, there's a flash frame, like a single frame, not even a second long. It's not black, it's white. Bright white. Too fast to notice unless you pause it just right. Everything goes overexposed, like someone turned on a floodlight right in front of the lens. Then it's gone. I slowed the video down. Frame by frame, there's no shape, no source, just pure white across the entire screen. Then it cuts back to normal. It doesn't happen in any other part of the trip. I stopped using the dash cam after that. I still have it, and the footage is all backed up on a drive. Every once in a while, I think about showing it to someone, maybe posting it online, but I always decide not to. There's nothing to explain. Just a clean 14-second blackout in the middle of nowhere. Then a flash the next day in the exact same place. I was hiking alone near Tikaboo Peak last fall, late October. The weather was still warm during the day, but it cooled off fast after sunset. I'd gone out there to get away for a few days. No real plan besides walking, sleeping under the stars, and being somewhere quiet. I didn't go all the way up the peak since I didn't want to mess with the restricted zone too much. I just parked a little ways off Groom Road and hiked in a wide loop along the foothills to the south, staying clear of the perimeter signs. It was my second night out. I'd set up camp in a wash, cooked some instant noodles, and climbed up a nearby ridge to watch the sun go down. The view out there is insane. The desert stretches flat for miles, and the light hits it in that deep orange way where everything looks like it's flickering. I was sitting there on a rock, just watching shadows crawl across the valley floor, when I noticed something moving across the flats, maybe 8 or 9 miles out. At first, I thought it was just dust devils or mirages. The heat can play tricks on your eyes out there. But after a minute, I realized it was a convoy. Looked like trucks, 6 or 7 in a loose line. No lights on, but the sun was low enough that their shapes stood out clearly. Big, rectangular, with high backs. They moved together like military transports, the kind with canvas covers over the beds. That wasn't unusual for that area. Everyone knows what's out there, and you're bound to see some weird government stuff if you stick around long enough. I figured they were just on some patrol or maybe hauling equipment. I pulled out my binoculars and watched them for a while. That's when I noticed something was off. First, there was no dust. Nothing. The whole desert floor out there is dry as hell, and anything moving that fast, and they were fast, should have been kicking up a serious trail. But the air behind them was completely still. Second, there was no sound. It was dead quiet. I could hear the wind against the rock I was sitting on and a plane way up high, but nothing from the trucks, not even a low hum. Third, the way they moved didn't seem right. They stayed perfectly spaced. Too perfect. No corrections, no slight swerves, no variation in speed. Just gliding in a clean line across uneven desert terrain like they were on tracks. But there's no road out there. I checked my topo map later, just open desert. I watched them until they reached a stretch near a dry lake bed, and then they did this weird staggered turn, one after another, like a ripple moving backward through the line. It was so fast and synchronized that I actually laughed a little. It looked choreographed. Then they vanished. I don't mean they sped away or went over a hill. I mean I blinked and they were gone. 1 second they were there, the next they weren't. I stared through the binoculars for a long time after that, scanning every inch of the valley. Nothing. No dust, no shapes, no shadows. Just empty ground. I stayed on that ridge until it got too cold, then made my way back to camp. I told myself it was some visual trick, maybe atmospheric interference or whatever, but I kept waking up through the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd picture that line of trucks moving like ghosts across the sand. Next morning, I packed up and started heading back toward the truck. I kept checking behind me without meaning to. I don't usually get spooked hiking solo, but something about the air that day felt wrong. Heavy, still, like being watched. About halfway back, I stopped to eat and rest in the shade of a boulder. That's when I noticed something new. There were tire tracks nearby, not fresh, but not old either. Big ones, dual tread, like what you'd see on military vehicles, but they didn't follow any trail. They cut across scrub brush through dips and rises in a line too clean to be natural. I followed them for about 20 yards before they just stopped. No curve, no fade out, no turn, just ended in the middle of the desert. The ground wasn't disturbed past that point. No footprints, no drag marks, no animal prints, just untouched dirt. I didn't like it. I turned around and went straight back to my truck. On the drive out, I passed one white SUV parked near the boundary signs. No markings. Tinted windows. I slowed down a little out of curiosity and the driver looked up at me. Just a man in dark sunglasses. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just watched me until I drove out of sight. I haven't been back since. I was working the night shift for a private security company out near Fort Huachuca in southern Arizona. Nothing glamorous, just perimeter patrol and motion sensor checks for a logistics depot that leased land close to the edge of the restricted zone. The military base itself was about 2 miles to the northeast, across a low ridge that cut through the desert. They kept to their side, we kept to ours. That was the deal. This was back in 2019. My shift started at 8 p.m. and ran until 4 a.m. I did the whole thing solo most nights, just me and an old Chevy Tahoe they gave me with half-dead AC and a two-way radio that picked up more static than voices. I didn't mind. The nights were quiet. Sometimes too quiet, honestly. There were cameras set up around the outer fence, but half of them were either offline or pointed at nothing. We were supposed to do hourly check-ins by radio, but after midnight, no one really cared. I think my supervisor, Todd, slept through half his shift in the trailer office. That night, mid-June, it was hot. Even after sundown, the heat clung to everything. I had the windows down and a cooler full of ice water in the back seat. Around 1:40 a.m., I parked up at the southern checkpoint, just a little gravel turnout near the wash, with a busted streetlight overhead. I was sitting there filling out some log sheet, listening to a Diamondbacks game from earlier that evening, when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was a plane, a single bright point above the ridgeline, just hanging there. It wasn't blinking, just steady and white. I watched it for a minute, thinking maybe it was a drone, but it wasn't moving like one. No bobbing or adjusting, just still. Then it started to descend, slow, smooth, dead silent. The ridge blocked the base beyond it, but I'd driven those roads before. I knew the layout. This thing was lowering down behind the crest, right in the direction of a comms station the Army used. A spot with satellite dishes and weird radar domes. They'd chased us off that land once when we got too close on patrol. I watched the light sink lower and lower until it disappeared behind the ridge completely. I waited, expecting to hear something. A chopper. Ground vehicles. Anything. But it stayed quiet. I keyed the radio and called it in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7, over." Crackle. Then Todd's voice, groggy. "Go ahead, 7. I've got a bright descending behind Sector C ridge, silent. Looked like it went down just north of the dish array. Nothing for a beat. Then Todd came back with, "Yeah, that happens sometimes. Just log it." I sat there holding the mic. "Say again?" "Don't worry about it. Write it in the notes. Don't go over there." I didn't like that answer. Todd didn't sound surprised. He sounded like someone repeating something he'd been told before. I put the radio down and kept watching the ridge. Still no sound. No glow. No sign of anything. After maybe 5 minutes, the Tahoe's dash screen flickered. Not off. More like static. The backup cam blinked on for half a second, even though I was in park. The radio went silent. I smacked it once and the feed came back, but the game was gone. Just dead air. That was enough for me to get moving. I drove slowly back toward the north service road that skirted the edge of the base. The gate was locked, obviously. We weren't allowed past the inner fence, but there was a decent view of the ridge from a spot near the water tank. I parked there and killed the engine. No light, no movement, just the desert breathing quietly in the heat. Then the sensor alarms lit up. Not the cameras, those were still useless. But the old metal motion detectors along the fence started pinging. First in zone 4, then 5, then 6. Like something was pacing the perimeter on the other side. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out with my flashlight, shined it down the line. Nothing. No wind, no animals. But the sensors kept going off, steady intervals, one after another, like footsteps circling the place. I backed into the Tahoe and radioed it again. "Todd, we've got multiple sensor hits along the north line. Something's moving out here." His voice came back slower this time. "Don't engage. Just stay in your vehicle." I asked if he could see anything on the camera feed from the trailer. He said no. Static across half the monitors. Told me not to approach the fence. Told me again to log everything and wait it out. That pissed me off, honestly. I wasn't new. I'd been out there a year already, and I'd never heard of anything like that. I grabbed the spotlight from the back seat and walked to the fence anyway. Still nothing. No sound, no tracks. But the sensors were going nuts. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. Every zone fell quiet, like someone had flipped a switch. The spotlight flickered in my hand, then died. I walked back to the Tahoe and sat there with the windows down. The air felt wrong. Heavy. I kept checking the mirrors. Nothing. Around 2:30, the radios crackled and came back to life on their own. Static first, then voices again. I checked the dash. Everything was normal. Again. I did one last loop of the property before heading back to the trailer. When I walked in, Todd was already packing up his stuff. He didn't look tired anymore, just distracted. I told him what I saw, what the sensors did, what the equipment did. He didn't even write it down, just nodded and said, "They don't tell us everything." I left that job 6 months later. Never saw the light again. I was driving east on 375, the extraterrestrial highway, sometime around 9 at night. Not for fun, I was heading from Tonopah to Caliente to pick up a backup generator for the cell tower I maintained. Company didn't want to pay for delivery. Said if I took the work truck and kept receipts, they'd throw in overtime. I wasn't thrilled, but I liked the drive through that stretch. Usually quiet, usually nothing out there. I'd done that route a few times before. There's a long patch near Rachel where the highway curves gently between low hills, nothing but sagebrush and gravel on both sides. On clear nights, you can see the lights from Groom Lake glowing faint behind the mountains, a kind of soft haze. No towers, no blinking red beacons, just a glow. They never completely go dark. I was a few miles past the black mailbox turnoff, listening to a baseball game cutting in and out on AM. Stars were out. My headlights lit up a rabbit or two, but I hadn't passed another car in close to half an hour. I came around this bend where there's a small pull-off with a faded cattle guard, and that's when I saw it, a road I'd never seen before. It was fresh pavement, blacktop so clean it still had chalk lines along the edges. No gravel shoulder, no cracked edges, just a perfectly smooth lane, maybe 2 car widths wide, leading off the main highway and heading northwest into the hills. No signage, no markers. It wasn't on any map or GPS I had, and I knew it hadn't been there a month earlier. I slowed down automatically, hit the brakes, rolled past it maybe 10 yards, then backed up. I could see the lane disappearing into a shallow rise, curving around the first set of hills. It didn't look like a construction zone. No cones, no lights, not even tire marks. I sat there for a second with my hazards on, staring at it. Something about it didn't sit right. There was no reason to build a road out there. I'd seen BLM access roads and service trails, and this wasn't one. This was real asphalt, smooth, dark, and clean, like it had been laid that week. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo through the windshield, then checked the GPS again. Nothing, just a blank spot where the road was. I thought about following it, just for a minute. Curiosity, I guess. But something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a weird hesitation. Like I'd walked into a room and couldn't remember why. Instead, I figured I'd loop around and come back. Maybe I was tired and seeing things wrong. Maybe there was some kind of reflection making it look newer than it was. I checked my mirrors, turned around slowly, and headed back the direction I'd come, maybe half a mile, then circled back. When I reached the same spot again, the road was gone. Not like hidden or overgrown, gone, just flat desert shoulder. The barbed wire fence was back along the edge where the pavement had been. No blacktop, no turnoff, just dirt and brush and a narrow ditch like always. I slowed to a crawl, flipped on my high beams, drove past the spot 3 times, forward and back. Nothing. The part that really got to me was the cattle guard. It was there again, rusty and half buried. But when I'd seen the new road, it had cut across that same section. The pavement had gone right over where the guard should have been. And now it was back, like the road had never existed. I parked and got out with a flashlight, walked around a bit, trying to find fresh tire marks, maybe a cut fence, something. The ground was dry and crusted, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. No loose gravel, no sign of construction. I went back to the truck and checked the photo I'd taken. It was just black, not a corrupted file, just a dark image. I could barely make out my dashboard and the corner of the windshield, but outside the glass it was pitch. No road, no headlights reflecting off asphalt, just void. That made my stomach drop a little. I sat there with the engine idling, flipping between maps and satellite views, but nothing showed any new roads. That part of the highway hadn't been updated in years. I drove the rest of the way to Caliente without stopping again. When I got to the equipment depot, I asked the guy on duty, Paul I think his name was, if he knew about any new construction going on near Groom Lake. He just laughed and said, "Out there? They don't tell us squat." I kept that part of the trip to myself. Told the supervisor the drive was fine, generator loaded up no problem. About a week later, I drove the same route again. Same stretch of highway, same time of night. I slowed down early, checking both sides of the road carefully. No sign of anything new. No cuts in the fencing, no blacktop in the dirt, no mismatched patches. I never saw the road again. I was out behind the house around midnight, same as most clear nights that year. I'd gotten into amateur astronomy pretty heavy after I moved out to Green Springs. Not much to do out there besides stargaze and fix things that shouldn't be broken yet. The skies were some of the darkest in the state. No light pollution, just endless stars. It's the one thing I liked about that place. I'd set up the Dobsonian on the back deck, pointed south. I was doing some casual observation, nothing too technical, just scanning Cygnus for double stars, messing around. I remember it was one of those rare nights where the air was perfectly still, no wind at all. Even the pine trees on the ridge line weren't moving. The crickets had gone quiet, which I only noticed later. I was leaning over the scope with my red flashlight clipped to my hoodie when I noticed something was off. Not in the eyepiece, just with the stars themselves. A patch of sky near Deneb looked wrong. At first I thought maybe there was a low cloud or some high-altitude haze, but the weather had been bone dry all week. The stars in that area weren't dim, they were just gone, like someone had taken an eraser to that part of the sky. It wasn't shaped like a cloud either, it was too clean. A long, horizontal oval, blacker than black. Not shimmering or glowing, just solid, like a cutout. It was moving slow, left to right across the sky. I remember blinking a few times to make sure it wasn't my vision. It moved silently, steady as anything. No lights, no trail, just this shape blotting out the densest part of the Milky Way like it didn't belong there. I stepped away from the scope and stood at the edge of the deck to get a better view with the naked eye. Whatever it was, it didn't reflect anything. Not starlight, not ambient light from the horizon. It was like looking at a hole in space. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds before I realized I was holding my breath. It felt wrong, somehow. Not scary, exactly. More like a pressure in my chest, like my body wanted to freeze up even though nothing was happening. Then the shape paused. Mid-glide, it just stopped. That's when I noticed how quiet everything was. No insects, no rustling, no distant barking from the houses down the slope. Just this blanket of silence and the weird hum in my ears, like I'd stood up too fast. The blackout shape hovered there for another 10 seconds or so, then shifted. Not forward, down. The way it moved wasn't right. It didn't descend like a plane or a balloon. It just repositioned, instantly, but not abruptly. Like the space it was in changed, not the object itself. That's the only way I can describe it. It stayed low for maybe 5 more seconds, then started gliding again, but this time toward me, slowly, still silent. No wind, no displacement. I remember backing up until I was standing inside the doorframe of the kitchen, still staring at it through the screen. I could see it moving above the ridge, blotting out more stars as it passed. Big. Maybe football field size, but it was hard to tell with no lights or structure to go by. Just a moving shadow. Maisie, my neighbor's dog, started barking 2 houses over. Then she went quiet mid-bark. Not like she stopped, like something cut her off. The power went out a few seconds after that. I heard the fridge click off behind me and the porch light died. I was in complete darkness except for the stars. I remember stepping out again slowly, eyes adjusted now, and the thing was right above me. No lights. No detail. Just a void blotting out half the sky. It wasn't directly overhead, off to the right, maybe 100 feet up, lower than any plane had business being. Still no sound, still no wind. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like a full minute. Then it moved again. Same weird way. Not flying, just changing position. It shifted back toward the ridge and rose higher, gaining altitude in a straight vertical line, like it was done. I watched it until it disappeared into the stars again, just blended back into the sky like it had never been there. A few seconds later, the porch light flicked back on. The fridge hummed. Crickets started chirping again, all at once. I stood there another few minutes, then locked everything up and went to bed without brushing my teeth. Next morning, I checked the local weather logs to see if maybe a weird cloud formation could explain it. Nothing. Skies had been clear all night. I even pulled the footage from my trail camera, but it only caught static between 12:02 and 12:11 a.m. I didn't go out again for a week. When I finally did, I couldn't bring myself to look up. It was a Friday night in late August, bone dry and still warm, even after the sun had been down a while. I was out near Walker Lake with my buddy Jordan. We'd driven up from Hawthorne after dinner to do some night fishing, not at the lake itself, but at this little side pond that sits in the old floodplain just south of it. It's technically part of a dry lake bed now. Most years it's nothing but cracked mud and weeds, but with the snowmelt runoff that spring, it held enough water to stock a few browns. We got there a little after 9 p.m. Full moon, no wind, clear as glass. You could see the outlines of the mountains in every direction, even without a flashlight. The air had that flat, hollow sound you get in the high desert at night. Quiet, but not peaceful, like everything's listening, waiting. You know? We parked on a patch of gravel about 50 yards from the water. Just a wide, shallow pool ringed with saltbush and tumbleweeds. Not exactly scenic, but the fish were biting, and that's all we cared about. Jordan set up a little folding table with snacks and beer. I got the rods ready. We weren't planning to stay long, maybe until midnight, max. First hour was normal. Caught a couple small ones, let them go. Talked about nothing. I remember there was a weird smell in the air at one point, kind of like burnt dust or hot plastic, but I didn't think much of it. That area is not far from the old army depot, and sometimes you get a whiff of something chemical when the wind shifts. Around 10:45, Jordan lit a cigarette and pointed at the sky behind me. "Hey," he said, "what are those?" I turned, expecting maybe a plane or a satellite. Instead, I saw 5 white lights, perfectly round, perfectly still. They were lined up in a horizontal row, evenly spaced, just hanging there in the western sky. They didn't blink, they didn't move. No sound, just 5 clean dots, like someone had poked holes in the dark. At first, I thought they might be flares, but they weren't drifting. No smoke trails, no flicker, and they were too high for that. Higher than any helicopter would hover, but not as high as a satellite. Just this low, quiet shelf of sky above the mountains. We watched for a minute, maybe more. They didn't change. I checked my phone, no service out there, which wasn't unusual, and tried to take a picture, but the screen stayed black like the camera wouldn't load. Then, without warning, the one on the far left went out. Not like it faded, just blink. Gone. About 3 seconds later, the next one winked out. Then the third, then the fourth, all with that same pause in between. When the last light disappeared, the sky looked exactly as it had before. No trails, no afterglow, nothing. Like they'd never been there. Neither of us said anything right away. I think we were both waiting for the logical explanation to kick in, like maybe a plane turned or lights got blocked by clouds. But there were no clouds and nothing moved. After a few minutes, Jordan broke the silence. "That wasn't normal," he said. I agreed. We packed up not long after that. I don't think we even talked about it again until we were halfway back to town. Thing is, the weirdness didn't end there. Back in the car, I noticed the dashboard clock said 12:32 a.m. That made sense. We'd been out a while. But when I checked my watch, it still said 11:07. The second hand was ticking, but the time was wrong. I tapped it, thinking maybe I'd bumped the dial. It was a cheap analog Timex, nothing digital, no glow face, just a plain old watch. But the time didn't match. Jordan looked at his phone. The lock screen said 11:06. Inside the car, in town, with service. We figured maybe the phone was slow to update. It happens, but it stuck in my head. Next morning, my watch still showed the wrong time. Not off by a few minutes, off by over an hour. I reset it. It's kept good time since. Jordan texted me 2 days later, said he'd been sleeping weird. Not nightmares, just waking up feeling like he hadn't really slept. I'd been feeling the same way, but hadn't thought to mention it. We didn't go fishing again after that. Not for a while anyway, and not near Walker Lake. There's just something off about that place, especially at night. That whole stretch between Hawthorne and Fallon has a long, flat sky and too much empty space. It feels like the kind of place where things can show up, things that aren't supposed to, and no one would ever know. It was a Wednesday. Late April, cool but dry. I remember because I'd just gotten off a string of night shifts and finally had a few days where I didn't owe anyone my time. I drove out to the Kaibab Plateau, north rim side of the Grand Canyon. It's quieter up there, no crowds, just tall pines, big sky, and the feeling like you've stepped outside the rest of the world. I'd been poking around forest roads all morning, looking for an old firebreak trail someone on a forum said looped near the edge of a restricted area, not the park boundary, but the Department of Defense kind. There's a fence that cuts through part of the forest. No signs from the main roads, but if you follow the back trails long enough, you hit it. I wasn't trying to get into anything illegal. I just like walking the edges of places I'm not supposed to be. Makes me feel like I've seen something most people haven't. I parked my car off a disused spur road around noon. There were old tire tracks, but nothing fresh. It felt like nobody'd been out there in months. Brought a compass, map, and my old Casio digital I wear on hikes. Nothing fancy, just dependable. I didn't want to get turned around out there. Even in daylight, that forest gets thick fast. The hike was uneventful at first. Forest was quiet, no wind, no birds either, now that I think about it. No squirrels, just the sound of my boots crunching pine needles. I followed a dry wash uphill for maybe 2 hours before I saw it. Chain link fence, 8 feet high, topped with barbed wire. No gates, no markings from this side. It stretched in both directions, disappearing into the trees. I took a break near a boulder, drank some water, checked my compass. It pointed northeast, which lined up with the map. Everything was normal. I started walking parallel to the fence, keeping maybe 15 feet between me and the wire. Terrain got rockier. I checked the time, 4:19 p.m., and figured I'd give it another half hour before turning back. That's when the compass started acting weird. I didn't notice right away, just felt like I was veering off my line. I pulled it out to double check, and the needle was doing these slow, jerky spins, like it wanted to point somewhere but kept changing its mind. It'd lock in for a second, then start rotating again. Not fast, just confused. I tapped it, waited, shook it once, still the same. I figured maybe I'd passed over a vein of something metallic in the ground, so I moved a few yards uphill. Same thing. The needle didn't settle. That's when I checked my watch, 4:19 p.m. Okay, I thought I just hadn't been out that long. Maybe I misjudged the walk. I kept moving, figuring I'd turn around at 4:30. 10 minutes later, I looked again, still 4:19. I pressed the buttons. Nothing responded. The screen wasn't frozen, the digits were clear, but the seconds weren't changing. It was just stuck, like a photo of time instead of time itself. That's when I started noticing the quiet again, like really noticing it. There wasn't wind anymore. No bugs, no birds, nothing. I clapped once. The echo came back too quick, like the trees weren't as far as they looked. It felt wrong, compressed, like I was standing inside a space that didn't match the size it looked like from the outside. I stood still for a while, didn't move, just listened. The fence was behind me. I hadn't touched it, hadn't gone close enough to trip any sensors if there were any, but I had the strong feeling that something on the other side of it was aware of me. Not watching, just aware. I don't know how else to put it. I turned around and started heading back the way I'd come. Compass still spinning. Watch still at 4:19. About 5 minutes into the walk back, I passed a dead tree that looked weirdly familiar. That's when it hit me. I'd already passed it twice earlier, once going up the hill, once near the fence. I didn't recognize it because of how the bark peeled back, but the way the top bent east was unmistakable. So either I'd walked in a circle or something else had shifted. I checked my map. My markings didn't line up anymore. The dry wash I followed should have been to my right, downhill. It was gone, just trees and brush. I kept walking anyway. Didn't care if I had to bushwhack for miles, I just wanted to put distance between me and that fence. After what felt like an hour, I saw the hood of my car glinting between the trees. I practically jogged the last stretch. The second I stepped onto the gravel beside the car, I checked my watch, 4:37 p.m. The seconds were ticking normally. I pulled out the compass. The needle pointed due north, steady as ever. I sat in the car for a long time, engine off, windows down, listening. The normal forest sounds came back. Insects, a bird call, the wind picking up. It felt like slipping back into a world I hadn't realized I'd stepped out of. The drive back to the main road took maybe 40 minutes. I didn't stop, not even to check my phone, which suddenly had 3 bars again. That night, I left the watch on my nightstand. The next morning, it was still working. Time was accurate. I tried taking it apart to see if something had glitched or broken, but everything looked normal. No corrosion, no water damage, nothing loose. I haven't worn it since, and I haven't gone back to that part of the Kaibab either. I was flying from Tonopah to St. George that afternoon. Nothing fancy, just a routine VFR hop in my 1978 Piper Archer. I'd made the trip maybe a dozen times before, so I knew the route: flat desert, sparse traffic, smooth air if the wind's not kicking. It was around 3:45 p.m. when I took off. Skies were mostly clear, maybe a little haze along the horizon. The forecast had called for calm conditions all the way across. The flight was normal for the first hour or so. I climbed out 9,500 feet, got settled, leaned the mixture. I had my usual setup going, autopilot dialed in, ForeFlight on the yoke, engine instruments all solid. I wasn't talking to any tower, just monitoring center frequency, checking in every so often. Didn't see another aircraft on ADS-B the whole time. I was about 35 miles northeast of Rachel when I noticed something ahead. A shimmer, like heat distortion, but not on the ground. It was midair, maybe 3 miles out, dead center of my windshield. Oval-shaped, kind of long horizontally, just hovering there. I thought at first it was a reflection from the sun, so I shifted to one side. The shimmer didn't move. It held its shape. That's when I keyed the mic. I said something like, N6845W, I'm observing a visual anomaly, stand by. It wasn't a panic call or anything. I wasn't in trouble. I just wanted to report what I saw and get a vector around it if needed. The shimmer pulsed. That's the only word I can use. Not in brightness, in presence. 1 second it was faint, like looking through water. The next it was nearly invisible. But it didn't move. There were no clouds around it. No contrails, just empty blue sky and this strange distortion. Then I wasn't flying anymore. The next thing I remember is hearing static in my headset and realizing my hand was still hovering near the push-to-talk button. The panel showed I was still level, still at altitude. I glanced at the clock. It was 4:28 p.m. I stared at that for a second. Last time I'd checked was 4:19. I'm not saying time jumped forward in any dramatic way. It's just that I had no memory of those 9 minutes. Nothing. No course correction, no turbulence, no chatter on the radio. I should have had at least a mental snapshot of what I was doing, but there was nothing, like a skipped reel. I checked the GPS breadcrumbs. The track was steady. No zigzags, no altitude fluctuations, just a straight line. But here's the thing. There was a 0.3 nm gap in the breadcrumb trail. No data for that stretch. It jumped from one point to another like I'd teleported, and I hadn't lost signal. I made a quick radio call to Salt Lake Center and asked if they'd received my earlier transmission. The controller came back sounding a little confused. He said he'd heard part of it, then nothing. He tried to raise me twice and got silence. I asked when that was. He said around 4:20. I told him I was back on course and fine, just wanted to confirm. He didn't push it. I didn't either. I landed in St. George around 5:30. After shutting down and tying off, I pulled out my phone to check the voice memo I sometimes run during flights. Nothing was recorded after the moment I called in the anomaly. It just cut out. I walked across the ramp and sat at one of those concrete picnic tables near the hangars. I just sat there for maybe 20 minutes, trying to piece together what I knew. I wasn't hurt. I didn't feel dizzy or sick. But my left wrist, the skin under my watch, had a faint red outline like a sunburn. Just that one patch, nowhere else. I hadn't taken my watch off the whole flight. That night, I called a friend who works charter ops in Kingman. I told him part of it, left out the weirder stuff. He asked if I'd been flying near any restricted zones. I checked the map again. I was clear. Closest edge of the R4808 complex was still 20 miles south. I didn't file a report, didn't call the FAA. What would I even say? Weeks later, I was reviewing my GoPro footage from that flight. I mounted over my shoulder, angled at the panel and windscreen. It records in 1-hour loops. Everything looked normal, until I reached the point just before I saw the shimmer. The video glitched. One frame, the sky was clear. The next frame, there was this faint, arched blur in the distance, like a smudge across the horizon. And then the video jumped. The clock skipped 9 minutes. Just like that. No buffer full, no card error, just gone. The rest of the flight looked fine. I still fly that route now and then. I stay further north, add a few extra minutes, but it's worth the peace of mind. Nothing else has happened since. But I can't explain those 9 minutes, or why I said what I said into the mic. I don't remember choosing those words. I've never said visual anomaly in my life. We were just a few miles east of Rachel, Nevada, off one of those endless gravel roads that lead toward the Nellis boundary signs. It was late September, warm during the day, but cold as hell once the sun dropped. I was out there with 3 friends, Mason, Jared, and Liz, all of us in our late 20s. Mason had this idea to camp near the border of the Area 51 restricted zone. Just a novelty trip. We weren't trying to trespass or get arrested, just wanted to camp, watch the sky, maybe catch some weird lights if we got lucky. We brought 2 tents, parked my Tacoma behind a low ridge to block the wind, and set up about half a mile from the no trespassing signs. Still on public land, still legal. We had a little fire ring going by sunset, and everyone was in good spirits. Liz had brought a cheap pair of night vision binoculars, and we were passing them around, spotting aircraft. You could tell the difference between commercial planes and the military stuff, the speed, the height. We even saw something banking hard around 10 p.m., like way too fast for how sharp it turned, but it was too far off to get a good look. Anyway, around midnight, the wind started to pick up and the others decided to crash. I stayed up, sitting in one of those collapsible camp chairs near the fire, just kind of zoned out. I don't sleep well on the ground anyway, and I liked being the last one up. It was dead quiet by then. I remember the fire had died down to embers, and all I could hear was the wind brushing over the rocks and the nylon walls of the tents rustling now and then. Then the red light swept across the ground. It didn't come from above like a helicopter. It wasn't a flashlight or a vehicle. There was no engine, no rotors, no hum. It was just there. This wide, flat beam of red light moving across the scrubby ground about 20 feet from where I sat. It didn't flicker, didn't pulse. It was perfectly even, about 4 feet wide, maybe 10 feet long, like a rectangle gliding sideways. At first, I thought someone was messing with a drone, maybe one of the other campers nearby, but there weren't any other cars for miles. We hadn't passed anyone all day. I stood up slowly and watched the beam slide farther out into the brush. It made no sound. Nothing cast it. I checked the sky, scanned the hills, turned a full circle. There was no source, just the beam. It stopped suddenly. It didn't fade out. It just froze in place for maybe 2 seconds, then snapped away. Not like it shut off, like it disappeared. I held my breath for a while. It was darker than it had been. The fire was almost completely out, and the moon had dipped behind the ridge. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it where the beam had been, but it looked the same. Sagebrush, dirt, a few tire tracks from earlier. I sat back down and kept the flashlight on my lap. I didn't want to wake the others unless something else happened. I tried convincing myself it had to be something explainable, maybe a reflection from a passing plane, even though the angle was wrong and it was dead quiet. I was wide awake now, just waiting. About 20 minutes later, I heard a series of clicks. Not mechanical, not metal. More like tongue clicks, but fast and rhythmic. 4 in a row, spaced evenly, then silence. I looked toward the sound, which came from the northwest slope, maybe 50 feet beyond the tents. I stood up again, flashlight off, and waited. Then another set, 4 clicks. Same pattern, same place. I said hello without really meaning to. Nothing answered. No wind, no animals, no footsteps. I walked a few steps toward the sound, then stopped. Something about it felt off, like I was being baited. I backed up slowly and got into the truck. Locked the doors. I waited there for another hour, listening. No more clicks, no more lights. Eventually I fell asleep in the cab. The sun was already up when I woke up, probably around 7 a.m. Mason was boiling water over the camp stove and didn't seem to notice anything weird. Neither did Jared or Liz. I asked if any of them had been up during the night. They all said no. When we packed up and headed out, I stopped the truck by the spot where the red beam had swept across the dirt. I walked out a bit to look, not sure what I was expecting. There was a faint, rectangular impression in the dust. Not burned, not wet, just slightly more compacted, like someone had pressed a plank into the ground and removed it. I didn't say anything to the others. We just drove out the way we came. When we passed the no drones sign near the cattle grid, I remember Mason joking about how dumb it would be to fly anything out here without getting it shot down. I kept thinking about the beam, the way it moved, the way it stopped. It didn't act like light. I was flying the Mavic Pro just east of Calhoun, Colorado. Wide open plains out there, mostly farmland with a few cattle properties scattered around. I'd driven out from Colorado Springs that morning. Clear sky, light wind, nothing in the forecast. My plan was to get some low-altitude shots of an abandoned grain silo I'd scouted on Google Earth a week earlier. Nothing illegal. It was on public access land, and I wasn't anywhere near Peterson or Schriever. I'd been flying drones for about 4 years by that point, mostly freelance stuff. Real estate footage, construction surveys, that kind of thing. Never had a crash, never lost signal. I was careful with battery levels and always checked airspace maps before heading out. I mention all that because this wasn't some rookie screw-up. Anyway, I got there around 8 a.m., parked off a dirt road next to a line of half-dead cottonwoods. Temperature was low 70s, sky a little hazy from wildfire smoke drifting in from the west. You could see for miles the kind of flat, open landscape where even a pickup 2 miles away throws dust high enough to notice. I launched the drone around 8:15, set it to about 120 feet, and pushed it out over the wheat stubble toward the silo. The camera feed was clean, sharp video, no latency, GPS strong, no birds, no signal interference. I did a couple wide orbits around the structure, then dropped altitude to maybe 30 feet to get some tracking shots along the dirt road that ran past the property. The whole thing was running smooth. Then the drone just stopped. Not crashed. Stopped. Like something grabbed it midair and held it still. I thought maybe I'd lost signal, but the telemetry still showed full bars. Battery was around 63%, no wind warnings, no obstacle sensors tripped. But on the feed, the drone was just hanging there, not responding. I tried turning it slowly, adjusting pitch, nothing. I tapped return to home, still nothing. It just hovered. Then the altitude reading dropped to 0 in 1 second flat, from 33 feet to 0. But I never saw it fall. The feed didn't cut. It stayed on that last frozen frame for a second or two, then went black like the lens had been covered. But the app still thought the drone was connected. It just wouldn't respond to anything. I got this tight feeling in my chest. Not panic, but something close. I shut the controller down and started walking in the direction I'd last seen it. The field was dry and flat, so it should have been easy to spot. It wasn't. I paced a 10-yard grid for nearly half an hour, eyes on the ground, nothing but crushed weeds and old tire ruts. Then I walked up to the silo and checked the perimeter, just in case it clipped something on descent. Still nothing. Right as I was about to give up and chalk it up as lost hardware, I saw something about 50 yards north, half tucked under the edge of a rusted-out cattle trough. The drone. Not broken. Not scratched. Just sitting there. I picked it up. The props weren't bent and the gimbal wasn't locked, but it was completely dead. No power at all, even though it had been over 60% when I launched. Battery light wouldn't flash, wouldn't charge, wouldn't register in the charger back home. Same with the backup I swapped into test. Fine when I left, totally drained when I found it. I didn't touch anything else that day. Just packed up and drove home. That night, I hooked the drone to my laptop to pull whatever was left on the SD card. The files stopped exactly at 8:31:20 a.m. Same second the telemetry showed the drop. There was no footage of the fall. The last video was a smooth, clear shot of the silo's southern wall, then black. I checked the flight logs. They said the drone had landed normally. Not crashed, not forced down. Landed. Except I never initiated landing, and it wasn't anywhere near the last GPS point. I sent the log to DJI's support out of curiosity. They just said the file showed no errors, no signal loss, and that it looked like a safe manual landing. Which didn't make sense. I tried every control I had, and it didn't respond to any of them. The next weekend I went back, mostly to see if maybe it was some kind of localized signal interference. I set up in the same spot, same drone, new battery. I didn't even get the props spinning. Before I launched, I noticed this weird shimmer on the horizon. Thought it was heat haze at first, a sort of wavering spot maybe 200 feet above ground, like the air was bending. I stepped forward to get a better look, and it just blinked out, like a mirage vanishing when you adjust your angle. About a minute later, the drone app started flashing a no-fly zone warning. Not a TFR or advisory, a hard block like you'd get near an airport, except there's nothing restricted in that exact spot. I checked FAA maps, checked Before You Fly, even pulled up sectional charts. Nothing showed any restricted airspace for 5 miles in any direction. I waited 20 minutes. Still blocked. I tried a different drone, smaller, less sensitive, and it wouldn't even arm the motors. I haven't flown out there since. Every once in a while, I'll pull up the old GPS coordinates where I found the drone, 38.8872, 104.2957, just to see if something pops up on satellite view. But there's nothing there, just an old trough. Same cracked dirt, same weeds. No towers, no gear, no signs. I kept the drone. It still won't power on. I was out checking the south pasture around 2 a.m. early November. I know that sounds weird. Most people don't walk fence lines in the middle of the night, but I'd heard the cattle stirring from the house, and when you've lived out here long enough, you get a feel for what's normal and what's not. This wasn't coyotes. The movement was different, heavier, more spread out. The ranch is about 12 miles east of Tonopah, mostly open range and sagebrush, with a few clusters of old juniper out near the hills. Closest neighbor is 5 miles south. I've got motion lights along the back half of the property and a single trail cam pointed at the water trough, mostly for mountain lions. It's quiet country, flat for miles except for the ridges to the north. I took the quad out, same one I've had since 2008. Brought the spotlight, a thermos, and my 30-30, not because I expected trouble, just habit. It was cold but clear. No wind, no moon. Stars were out like glass. I reached the south line around 2:20 and parked next to the cattle gate, shut off the engine and listened. At first, nothing, just the click of the engine cooling and the occasional shifting from the cows way off toward the east fence. I scanned the area with the spotlight. Everything looked fine. I was about to get back on the quad when I saw movement in the far distance. Maybe 400 yards out, beyond the fence, where the land dips toward the dry creek bed. At first I thought it was a cow that had gotten out, but it wasn't shaped right, too narrow, too tall. It wasn't walking either, it was gliding. That's the part that stuck with me. It didn't bounce or sway like an animal moving across uneven ground. It just moved in a straight line, perfectly level, maybe 4 or 5 feet off the desert floor. No wings, no legs, just a shape. Maybe 7 feet tall, longer than it was wide, dark against the brush. I thought maybe a tarp caught in the wind, but there was no wind, and it was moving too cleanly, too purposefully. I stood behind the fence and just watched it. Didn't reach for the rifle, didn't call out. I don't know why. Then the spotlight went out. Not flickered, just snapped off. I tapped the casing. Nothing. Tried the switch. Still nothing. It had fresh batteries when I left the house. So I used the scope on the rifle to try and get a clearer look. The shape was still moving, same height, same speed. It was headed west, parallel to the fence line, not toward me, but not avoiding me either. Just steady. Then it stopped. Dead stop. Mid-air, like it had hit an invisible wall. I lowered the rifle and blinked a few times, thinking maybe I was imagining it, but it was still there, perfectly still, hovering above the brush. That's when the air changed. It got heavier. My ears popped, like I'd gone up too fast in an elevator. The hairs on my arms stood up, even under the jacket. It was the same feeling you get right before a big thunderclap, but the sky was silent. I looked up, thinking maybe there was something above me, but the stars were all in place. Nothing blocked them. No sound, no wind, just pressure. Then the quad's instrument lights started blinking. The fuel gauge spun in a full circle and the odometer reset itself. Radio turned on for half a second, just static, then cut off again. The engine didn't start, but the starter clicked once, even though the keys were in my coat pocket. That thing in the field still hadn't moved. I backed away from the gate slowly, maybe 10 steps, then stopped. I didn't want to turn my back on it. About a minute later, hard to say exactly, it started moving again. Same direction, same height, same speed, like nothing had happened. The second it started moving, the air snapped back to normal. Ears popped again, but in reverse. I could hear the cattle shuffling around in the dark. I watched it until it passed behind a small rise near the creek bed. Never reappeared. I waited another 10 minutes before getting back on the quad. The instrument panel came back to life like normal. The spotlight still wouldn't turn on. When I got back to the house, I checked the trail cam footage. Nothing but a static frame from 217 to 228. Just froze on a single image of the empty water trough. The time kept ticking, but the image didn't change. Next morning, I went back to the spot with the dogs. No tracks, no marks in the dust, fence was untouched. I didn't tell anyone for a while. Eventually, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Kyle, over beers. He just nodded and said he once saw something similar near the same creek bed, maybe 6 years ago. He didn't offer details, and I didn't ask. I still walk the fences at night, still ride the same quad, but I don't park near that stretch anymore. I just keep going. I was parked just off Groom Lake Road around midnight, late October of last year. I'd driven out from Kingman for the weekend. Nothing special, just needed to get away from everything. I'd done the Area 51 tourist route before, the usual photo by the warning sign, but this time I planned to just stay put for a few hours and watch the sky. I brought a folding chair, some snacks, a cheap monocular I'd bought at a pawn shop, and a blanket. No cell signal out there, so I downloaded a couple of star maps ahead of time and put my phone in airplane mode. It was colder than I expected, maybe low 40s, but the sky was crystal clear. No clouds, no moon, just an ocean of stars above me. I parked about 200 yards off the main dirt road on one of the pullouts where the ground flattens out. No lights for miles. I turned off the engine, left the keys in the cup holder, and stepped out. The mountains out there, the ones that ring the base. They look painted on. At night, they just become jagged shadows, no depth or texture, like cardboard cutouts leaning against the stars. There's one range in particular to the north that always looks closer than it is. I think it's called the Papoose Range. That's where I was looking. I had the monocular trained up on a cluster of stars near Cassiopeia when I noticed a subtle flash, not from the sky, but from the ground. It wasn't bright. More like when you blink and think you saw lightning, but there's no sound. It came from the mountains, a quick strobe, just once, maybe half a second. It wasn't white or blue like lightning. It was this dull orange, almost amber, like a sodium lamp. Not natural, definitely not from a plane or a car. I lowered the monocular and stared at the range, and for that split second, I swear, the mountains flickered, like an old film reel skipping a frame. The ridgeline shifted. Not moved, changed. I saw something behind it, or inside it. A shape. It was maybe the size of a small stadium. Angular, almost like an arch or dome. The only reason I noticed it at all was because it didn't match the surrounding terrain. It was too smooth, too symmetrical. Then the light blinked off and it was just the mountains again. I stood completely still for a long time, trying to process what I'd just seen. I thought maybe it was fatigue or some weird trick of my vision, so I sat back down, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and just stared at that spot. About 10 minutes passed, no sound, no movement. I was starting to relax again when my car's dome light flicked on. The driver's side door was still shut. I was sitting 10 feet away. No animals around, no wind. But the interior light was on, glowing faint through the windows like someone had cracked the door, except it was still sealed. I walked over, opened the door fully, and looked inside. Nothing was disturbed. Keys still in the cup holder. Windows rolled up. I closed the door again and the light shut off. I sat behind the wheel, engine off, and stared at the mountains through the windshield. Every few minutes, I thought I saw tiny flickers, not as strong as the first one, just faint pulses like heat lightning without clouds. I turned on the radio. Static. Every station, AM and FM, just dead air, not even the usual background fuzz. That made me uneasy. There's usually something, even out there. I turned the radio off and cracked the window an inch. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything. Like, nothing. No insects, no wind, just dead, airless silence. I sat like that for another 30 minutes, watching the mountains, expecting them to stutter again, but they never did. But the silence stayed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind the ridgeline, something that wasn't part of the desert. Eventually, I turned the ignition and started the car. Everything came on normally. No dashboard lights, no system errors. I drove back down Groom Lake Road slow, glancing in the mirror every so often. Once I hit the highway again, the radio stations came back, one by one. Static faded, music returned, talk shows popped up. The desert behind me looked like it always did, vast and empty. I've been out there a few times since. Never saw that flicker again. But I don't park near that stretch of mountains anymore. We were hiking out past Queen City Summit, near the edge of the Nevada Test and Training Range. Not on the base itself, obviously, but close enough that the signs got real serious. Bright yellow metal ones with warnings about deadly force and hidden sensors. We weren't trying to mess with anything. We just wanted to camp for a couple nights, stargaze, maybe catch a glimpse of something weird. It was me, my cousin Tyler, and his friend Marco. Tyler's a machinist in Sacramento, real into aerospace stuff. Marco's a little more of a conspiracy guy, flat brim hat, infrared scope, the whole deal, but mostly harmless. I'm not really into that scene, but I like hiking and I had a long weekend, so I figured why not. We parked off a dirt road east of Rachel, hiked in about 6 miles along a dry wash. It was early March, chilly but not freezing. No clouds, no moon, just a thick canopy of stars. We set up camp behind a rock formation that blocked most of the wind, built a little fire, cooked sausages and canned beans. Just a normal desert night. Around 11 p.m., Marco started scanning the sky with his monocular. Tyler was fiddling with a homemade antenna thing he'd built to pick up air traffic control signals. I was just lying back on my pad looking at Orion. That's when we heard it. At first I thought it was a bee, or maybe an electric fence nearby. Just a soft buzzing, kind of high-pitched but mechanical. It wasn't coming from the ground. It felt like it was in the air around us. Not loud, but steady. Tyler sat up and said, "You hear that?" Marco nodded, but didn't say anything. He was already pointing the monocular up toward the ridge behind us. I stood and looked too. At first, I didn't see anything, just stars. But then 3 of them moved. They were in a triangle shape, equal distance from each other, low in the sky. The lights were white, but not bright. Dimmer than aircraft strobes. They didn't blink, just hovered there, totally still. Then the buzzing got louder. Not dramatically, just a notch higher, like an old fluorescent bulb kicking on. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera. It wouldn't start, just froze on the loading screen. I tried backing out, tried switching to the flashlight, nothing. The screen was still lit, but no apps worked. Tyler's phone wouldn't even turn on. He held down the power button and just shook his head. "It's dead," he said, like he didn't believe it. Marco had a little hand crank flashlight. He turned it on and pointed it up, just to see if it would reflect anything. The second he did, the buzzing stopped. The triangle of lights began to drift sideways. Not fast, just a slow, deliberate glide, like it was tracking along an invisible rail. No tilt, no wobble, no trail behind it. We watched it move for maybe 20 seconds, and then it vanished. Not like it zipped away, not like it dimmed out. It just blinked off. Gone. The buzzing didn't come back. The stars looked normal again. We stood there in silence for a long time. Nobody reached for their phone again. Eventually, we sat by the fire. Nobody said much. Marco went into his tent early. Tyler just poked at the coals and kept glancing at the sky. When I finally crawled into my sleeping bag, I checked my phone again. It was fine. Battery at 82%, apps working. Photos, flashlight, everything. I didn't sleep much that night. Next morning, Marco said he'd tried to take a picture too. Claimed his screen went green and made a clicking noise before shutting off. His phone wouldn't boot until we were halfway back to the car. We didn't report anything. Not sure who we'd report it to anyway. All I know is we saw something, and for whatever reason, none of our gear worked while it was happening. I used to work as an air traffic controller at a small FAA center on the Oregon coast, near Newport. This was back in 2009. I was 29, still relatively new, only 4 years in, but I'd gotten comfortable with the rhythm of the night shifts. Fewer planes, less chatter. Mostly just cargo flights and the occasional medevac running out to Portland. The center itself was pretty bare bones. One main radar display room, a comms console, and a couple of workstations. On nights, it was usually just me and a supervisor, sometimes a third guy if they were training someone. That night, it was just me and Dan Holloway. Dan had been doing this for almost 20 years and didn't talk much unless something needed fixing. We weren't friends exactly, but I trusted him. He was one of those people who never guessed. He either knew or he said nothing. It was late, just past 2 a.m. Clear skies, smooth night, nothing on scope except a UPS flight heading south along the coast and a corporate jet out near Boise. I had a fresh cup of gas station coffee and was halfway through a crossword when something pinged on the screen. It was just a blip at first, top right corner of the radar, out over open water. The return was tagged at 80,000 feet. No transponder. Not unheard of. Sometimes military runs their stuff dark and we're not looped in, but this wasn't in any of the scheduled military corridors. I looked at Dan. He'd seen it too. He just raised his eyebrows, didn't say anything. I tried hailing it on guard frequency, standard procedure. No response. I flagged it for observation and zoomed in a little. The radar showed it holding steady for about 10 seconds, and then it dropped. Not gradually. It went from 80,000 feet to sea level, exactly 0 in one radar sweep. Less than a second. I stared at the screen, waiting for some kind of correction. Ghost returns aren't uncommon. Sometimes it's weather, sometimes it's interference, but this one held. It didn't fade or fragment like a weather return. Dan leaned over and said, real quiet, "You seeing that?" I nodded. Then the return vanished. Not off the edge of the radar. It blinked out mid-grid like someone hit a switch. No trail, no climb back up, nothing. We sat there in silence for a bit. Then I brought up the raw radar playback, hoping it was just a glitch in the system's display and the raw would make more sense. It didn't. The raw return showed the same thing. It appeared at 80,000 feet, held for a few sweeps, then dropped straight to sea level in under a second and disappeared. I ran a system diagnostic. Everything was normal. No errors, no dropped pings. I printed a hard copy of the return logs. I know I shouldn't have. I think there's inside. We weren't supposed to print unless it was going into an incident report. But it felt like something I'd want proof of later. Dan didn't say anything, just went back to his screen. Around 3:45 a.m., two guys showed up. Not in uniform, not in any vehicle we recognized. They came in through the side entrance with badge access. I didn't catch their names. They didn't introduce themselves, just said they were contract IT support from Seattle. One of them went straight to the radar terminal. The other asked Dan to show him the system logs. I asked who called them. Dan just said, "Not us." They stayed until a little after 5. When they left, the system had been rebooted, the hard drives had been purged, and every radar sweep from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. had been overwritten. I checked the printer tray for the logs I'd printed. Gone. Dan and I just looked at each other. I started to ask something, but he cut me off and said, "Don't." We finished the shift like normal. Logged a quiet night, no incidents, no unusual traffic. A week later, I got pulled into the manager's office. They said they were doing a standard review of radar proficiency. Asked if I remembered anything strange from that night. I said no, just a quiet night. They smiled and said, "Thought so," and that was the end of it. Dan transferred to Phoenix a few months later. I left the FAA entirely the year after. I've never seen anything like that again, nothing even close. But I think about it more than I probably should. I was camping out near Factory Butte in Utah. No trail, just BLM land. Parked the truck way off the dirt road and hiked maybe a quarter mile with my gear. I'd done it before. I like camping solo out there. It's wide open, mostly flat with weird hills and rock formations like you're on the moon. And at night it's so dark you can see satellites crawling across the sky. That night was clear. No wind, cool but not cold, early October. I set up camp around 6:30, just a little one-man tent and a small fire pit made from a few rocks. I made a dehydrated meal, watched the sky go orange, then purple, then pitch black. Stars came out hard, brightest I'd seen all year. No moon. I stayed up a while, just sitting in my camp chair drinking cheap whiskey from a metal flask and watching for shooting stars. I had my phone off. No service anyway. The silence out there is hard to explain. It's like your ears start making up sounds to fill the space. A few times I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but it was always just wind shifting or the sound of my own blood in my ears. Sometime after 11, I climbed into my tent. I didn't sleep right away. I remember lying there listening to this buzzing in my head. Not a sound exactly, but like pressure, kind of like being in a plane that's still climbing. I figured I was overtired or maybe a little dehydrated. I closed my eyes, but that feeling wouldn't go away. Then I heard what I thought was a jet, a deep, low rumble starting far off. You hear military jets sometimes out there flying low across the desert, so I didn't think much of it. But it got louder and it wasn't moving across the sky. It was staying in one spot, right above me. The whole tent started vibrating. Not violently, just enough to make the poles flex a little. I thought maybe a plane was banking directly overhead or circling. After maybe 20 seconds, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. Right away, I knew something was off. It was dead quiet. No rumble, no jet, no wind, just silence. I looked up, and the stars were gone. Not all of them. Just this perfect circle of sky directly above me, totally blacked out, like someone had taken a cookie cutter and punched out a chunk of the night. It didn't look like clouds. Clouds move. This was perfectly still, perfectly round, and it wasn't just dark, it was black. Like it absorbed all the light around it. The stars at the edge of it looked brighter, like the contrast was turned up. I stood there staring for a Silverzerger. I don't know how long. 5 seconds? A minute? Then I noticed the edges were pulsing. Not like lights, more like heat ripples, just at the very edge of the circle. And there was a faint hum again. Not from the sky, though, it was inside my chest. That pressure was back. My skin felt tight. I started to feel really exposed, like I was standing under a microscope. I stepped back toward my tent without taking my eyes off it. I was holding my breath without realizing. Then, without a sound, the black circle just faded. Not all at once. It was like the stars bled back in one by one until the whole sky was normal again. The second it was gone, the breeze kicked back up. I could hear myself breathing again. I didn't go back in the tent. I sat by the fire pit and just watched the sky for a while. Nothing happened. No jets, no lights, no sound. Around 2 a.m., I crawled back inside and zipped it up. I didn't sleep. Next morning, I broke camp as soon as the sun came up. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee, just packed everything in 15 minutes and hiked back to the truck. But when I got there, something was off. The driver's side door was unlocked. I always lock it, always, especially when I leave it overnight in the middle of nowhere. I don't even think about it. It's muscle memory. Nothing was missing. Glove box was still closed, cooler was untouched in the bed. But the cab smelled weird, like static almost, like the way old electronics smell when they overheat. I drove out of there fast, bouncing all over the road. I kept checking the rear view like I expected someone to follow. There was nothing, just that endless empty landscape behind me. I didn't stop until I hit Hanksville. Pulled into a gas station, filled up, used the bathroom, and sat in the truck for a long time with the AC blowing. I checked my phone, no texts, no missed calls, just a weird notification saying SIM error for a few seconds before it fixed itself. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how precise that black circle was. Perfectly round, no blur at the edges, like geometry, like a hole in the sky. I haven't camped alone since. I was working out of a temporary botany field lab in central Utah. Just me and a generator about 100 miles from the nearest town. Nothing but sandstone and sagebrush for miles. The station sat in a narrow gulch just south of the San Rafael Swell, backed up against a small bluff. The place was meant for one person. Tiny living quarters, attached greenhouse, minimal everything. I was cataloging some genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. Real quiet work. Solitary. That week, the weather had been dry and still. Too still, actually. Not a breeze, not a cloud. The air felt stale, like the whole landscape was holding its breath. My greenhouse windows stayed wide open all day and the air didn't move. Even the insects were sparse. It made the heat sit differently. Heavy, even at night. It started with the soil sensors blinking out. I had 6 of them buried in different corners of the greenhouse. All custom rigged with a little Arduino array I put together myself. They tracked temperature, moisture, and pH, sent the data to my laptop over Wi-Fi every 10 minutes. Worked great until Tuesday morning. I woke up, checked my charts, and saw a 5-hour gap from midnight to just before 5. The whole system had flatlined. Then it picked back up like nothing happened. I thought maybe the Wi-Fi had gone out, but my laptop was still online and the generator hadn't shut off. I double-checked the timestamps. It wasn't a power thing. That afternoon, I opened up the greenhouse and noticed one of the hanging LED grow lights had shorted. The plastic casing was warped, looked half melted, like someone had taken a blowtorch to the edge of it. It wasn't close enough to any heat source for that to happen naturally. It also wasn't hanging straight anymore. The wires had pulled loose on one side. I replaced it and chalked it up to a freak electrical issue. Maybe the wiring had been bad from the start. The next night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sensor alarm chirping. 3 short beeps, meaning a pH drop below 4.0. That's a serious acid spike and totally unheard of for that soil. I pulled on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out to the greenhouse. The air was wrong. It smelled like burned dust, not smoke exactly, just scorched minerals. The kind of smell you get when lightning strikes near rock. When I opened the greenhouse door, the humidity hit me like a wave. It wasn't supposed to be humid. I hadn't watered that evening, and it hadn't rained in days. Still, the inside of the glass was fogged. I stepped in and froze. Every single plant had turned. They weren't like that when I went to bed. I checked them myself, did a round with the notepad, checked the roots on the gallium hybrids, misted the ferns. Everything was fine. But now every pot had rotated, not toppled or dragged, turned, as if each one had been gently swiveled in place. All of them were facing inward, toward the center of the greenhouse. There, right where the soil sensors converged, was a bare patch of dirt, just a meter wide. I hadn't planted anything there. I'd left it open for new specimens. The soil was disturbed, not dug up, but pushed down in a smooth, even circle, like something had been resting there. There were no prints, no marks, just a shallow depression, and above it, the glass ceiling was scorched, faint but visible. A black, smoky outline fanned outward in a ring, maybe a foot across. The glass wasn't cracked, but it had spider-webbed faintly in the center of that black mark. The metal framing around it had a shimmer, heat distortion, like it had been warped microscopically. I didn't go any closer. I just backed out of the greenhouse and locked the door. The next morning, I checked the cameras. I had one camera set up in the greenhouse for time-lapse growth tracking. It took a still every 30 seconds and compiled a composite each day. I opened the folder for the previous night and let the video play. The plants were normal until about 12:47 a.m. Then the footage glitched. One frame showed static. After that, the next frame was totally black and the following one was blank white. The timestamp jumped forward 4 hours. I looked through the raw stills. Every file between 12:47 and 4:51 was corrupted. Unreadable. Nothing but digital noise. I pulled the card, ran a recovery program. It found 437 images marked as missing or partial. I clicked through the thumbnails. Most were garbage. Data fragments. A few showed brief flashes of color, violet, pale green, like the lens had caught a sudden burst of light. One had what looked like a curve of something smooth and metallic in the top right corner. Too blurry to tell. No identifying features. I deleted the corrupted files and shut the camera off. I haven't turned it back on since. That day, the plants started acting strange. Some of the gallium leaves curled inward, like they were trying to close around something. The stems on 2 of the wild barley pots bent 90 degrees toward that central bare spot and stayed that way even after I rotated the pots again. I tried moving one of the ferns back to the edge of the bench. Next morning, it was tipped over, facing the center again. On Thursday night, I stayed up, sat in the greenhouse in a chair, flashlight in my lap. I didn't know what I expected to see. Around 1:30, the temperature dropped. Fast. I had a thermometer out and watched it fall from 77 degrees Fahrenheit to 61 degrees Fahrenheit in under 5 minutes. Just in the greenhouse, the air felt charged. My hair stood up on my arms. The LED lights flickered, then shut off completely. Then it was quiet. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. The silence was total. No generator, no wind, not even the distant whine of insects. Just stillness. I didn't hear or see anything else. But when I turned my flashlight back on, the bare spot in the center looked darker than before. Like the soil had been wet, but it hadn't rained. The plants were tilted again, just slightly. The next morning, I found all 6 of the soil sensors burnt out. The plastic casings were bubbled and the wires had melted into the dirt. My laptop was fine. Nothing else in the greenhouse was damaged. That was my last day out there. I radioed in, told them I was cutting the trip short due to a hardware malfunction. They didn't question it. Before I left, I scooped a small sample of the soil from the center patch, brought it back in a sealed jar. It's still on a shelf in my apartment. It dried out over the next few days. The color shifted, started as a dark red, now it's more gray. There's a faint ring around the inside of the glass where the soil doesn't stick, like something pushed outward from the center and left a residue. Sometimes when I walk past it, I swear I can smell that same burned dust. But only for a second. My wife, Becca, and I have a little cabin in northern Minnesota. Not full-time, it's just a place we go on weekends when we can. It's out past two harbors, tucked into the woods off a dirt road that barely shows up on GPS. My dad and I built it when I was 20, mostly as a hunting shack, but we fixed it up over the years, insulated it, added solar, got a little well pump going, real basic, but cozy. We don't get cell service out there. That's part of the appeal. This happened last September. It was one of the last weekends before the weather turned. Leaves were already changing, cold at night but warm during the day. We drove up Friday after work, arrived a little after dark. I got the fire going while Becca unpacked groceries. Same routine as always. That night, we were sitting out on the porch, just listening. The woods up there get quiet in a way you don't get near town. No traffic, no dogs barking, just wind in the trees, the occasional owl. But around 11, we started hearing something else. Not animal sounds, more like snapping, like someone stepping on sticks, then stopping, then another snap, maybe 50 feet away. I stood up and shone the flashlight around, but we didn't see anything. I figured maybe a deer or porcupine. But Becca got nervous. She hates not knowing what's out there, so I walked the tree line with the light. Didn't find anything, but the feeling stuck with us, like something was watching. The next morning, we found our trail cam in the dirt. We'd set it up a few weeks before to see what kind of wildlife came through. It was one of those motion-triggered ones, strapped to a birch about 15 feet from the cabin. It hadn't fallen, the strap had been unbuckled, like someone had taken it off on purpose and just dropped it. I figured it was a bear. They're curious. Maybe it pawed at the latch. But there were no scratches, no mud, no teeth marks. The camera wasn't even dirty. We brought it inside, turned it on, battery was fine, storage card was full, so I plugged it into my laptop. There were 86 clips from that night. The first few were what you'd expect, trees moving, a rabbit hopping by, nothing weird. But then at 11:13 p.m., the screen went black. Not like darkness, more like corrupted video. Static bars, weird pixelation, total nonsense. That lasted through clip after clip, nearly 2 hours of unreadable footage. Except for one. It was maybe 30 seconds long. Time-stamped 12:42 a.m. It looked like it was shot inside the cabin. It was our bed. I recognized the flannel sheets, the old headboard. Becca and I were both asleep. The angle was low from the foot of the bed, like the camera had been placed on the floor. We weren't moving, just breathing slow like we were out cold. And behind the camera, barely visible at the top edge of the frame, there was something standing, just a sliver of it. Not the whole shape. You could see what looked like ears curled around the top of the camera, long and pale. They weren't human. The joints bent wrong. There were too many of them. I scrubbed the timeline back and forth. No sound, no movement. Just that one still frame, like the video froze. Then the file ended. I didn't show Becca right away. I closed the laptop, made up some excuse about the footage being corrupted. But she could tell something was wrong. That afternoon, she found the file and watched it herself. I heard her in the bedroom. She didn't scream or anything, just went totally silent. When I came in, she was already packing. We left within the hour. Didn't even lock up. Just drove back to Duluth and stayed at her sister's place. For a few days, we didn't talk about it. Neither of us wanted to bring it up. But then the dreams started. I'd wake up with this buzzing in my head, like low static. Couldn't remember what I'd been dreaming, just felt like I hadn't slept. Once I woke up standing in the hallway, still holding my pillow. Another time I had mud on my feet. No idea how it got there. Becca had it worse. She started getting nosebleeds at night, always between 2 and 3 a.m., She'd wake up dizzy, arms numb. One time she swore she saw light coming in through the ceiling, like a flashlight but bluish and totally silent. I told her we needed to see a doctor. She said she didn't want to, that she knew it wouldn't help. I finally went back up to the cabin 2 weeks later. Alone. I needed to see if someone had broken in. Maybe a prank or a break-in. That's what I told myself. The front door was still locked. Nothing inside was touched. No broken windows. No signs of animals. The weird part was the trail cam was back on the tree. Same strap, same height, just reattached like it had never been moved. But the SD card was missing. I looked for hours, dug through the grass, checked the cabin, even pulled apart the firewood stack. Nothing. When I left, I got this tight pressure behind my eyes, like a sinus headache, but worse. It stayed with me the whole drive home. Only went away when I crossed back onto the highway. We haven't gone back since. The cabin's still there, far as I know. I check the weather station online sometimes, and the power's still working. Solar's charging, but we don't talk about it anymore. The laptop we used, the one with the video files, stopped booting a few months later. I brought it to a shop and they said the hard drive had been wiped. No idea how. I don't know what we saw in that video. I don't know what was in our room or how the camera got in there. But the angle was too low for a person standing. And whatever those fingers were, they weren't human. They were something else. I used to hike at night a lot. Less people, cooler air, no bugs, especially in the fall. I had a route I liked in the Ouachita Mountains, a loop trail not far from Talamana Scenic Drive in southeast Oklahoma. Nothing too rugged, just quiet ridgelines and dense pine forest. I always started around 8 or 9 p.m. and usually finished by 1 or 2 in the morning, depending on the pace. This night was in late October. It was cold but clear, dry enough that the leaves underfoot were crunchy and the moon was maybe half full, not bright enough to hike without a headlamp, but enough to cast shadows. I had the whole trail to myself, which I expected. I'd parked at a little turnout by the trailhead around 8:40 p.m., checked my gear, and headed in. It was uneventful at first, just peaceful. Wind in the trees, distant owls, the usual stuff. I stopped about halfway through the loop, maybe 11:15, at this overlook where you can see down into the valley. Sat on a flat rock, ate a protein bar, and turned off my light for a bit just to enjoy the quiet. That's when I saw the first weird thing. There were these 3 faint lights in the sky, barely visible through the tops of the trees across the valley. I almost missed them. They weren't moving fast, and they were dim, kind of bluish-white, like distant LEDs. I thought it might have been a plane, but they didn't blink. They just held steady, and they were arranged in a perfect triangle, one at each point. Not like 3 random lights drifting, they kept the same distance from each other the whole time. I watched for a while, trying to figure out what I was seeing. It was gliding slowly over the ridge, just above the treetops. And I mean just above. No blinking red or green lights, no contrails, no engine noise. It didn't even disturb the air or the trees. Dead silent. The way it moved was wrong. It didn't bank or tilt, just shifted smoothly, like it was on rails. I turned my headlamp back on after a minute because I started to feel exposed. Like if I could see it, maybe it could see me. I hiked the next stretch a little faster than usual, trying not to look behind me too much. I figured it was gone. But the feeling stuck with me. That weird, tight sensation in your gut, like you're being watched. I kept catching myself turning off my headlamp and listening. The forest was unusually quiet. No wind, no bugs, not even distant rustling. Just this heavy stillness. Then I noticed the smell. I was maybe 20 minutes from the trail's highest point, this flat ridge with younger pines and open sky. That's where I smelled it. Not sulfur or rotting meat, more like scorched plastic, like a hot circuit board. It wasn't strong, but it felt out of place. It didn't fade either. Usually smells come and go in the woods, but this was steady. I stopped and scanned the trees with my light. Nothing. No smoke. No sign of fire. Just that sharp, artificial scent clinging to the air. I kept going, slower now, trying to stay quiet. I didn't hear anything at first. Then, maybe a minute later, I heard branches shifting off to my left. Not breaking, just moving, like something large brushing through them. I froze. Waited. Thought maybe a deer. but it didn't sound like hooves or snuffling. It was smoother, consistent, like something gliding just behind the tree line, matching my pace. I turned my light that way and didn't see anything, but the movement stopped when I stopped. I waited a long time. Nothing. I kept going, and it started again. That same soft swaying of underbrush, like something moving with me, just out of sight. I didn't want to run, didn't want to make noise, so I sped up gradually. The sound didn't follow. When I reached the ridge, the smell disappeared. So did the movement. I stopped again near a clearing where the trail runs right along the edge of the hill. The moon was higher now. That's when I saw it again. The triangle. It was directly above the trees, maybe 100 yards out, just hanging there. Same faint lights, one at each corner. Not moving, no sound, not even the usual wind at that elevation. I killed my headlamp, crouched down by the brush, and just watched. It didn't hover like a drone, there was no wobble, no flicker, it was still. After maybe 30 seconds, it began to move. Not away, not toward me, just sideways, still flat, still perfectly level, sliding over the canopy like it was part of the sky. That's when I noticed the stars, or rather the lack of them. Inside the triangle, the sky was black. I don't mean dark, I mean empty, like it was blocking the stars completely. Even faint stars you could see in the rest of the sky weren't visible inside the shape. It was like looking at a hole in the night. I stayed crouched until it passed behind some trees and vanished from view. I didn't see it again. I waited a while, then turned my light back on and finished the loop as fast as I could without fully panicking. The weirdest part came when I got back to my car. I unlocked the door and sat for a second to calm down. That's when I realized something else was off. My phone said it was 2:47 a.m. That didn't make sense. The loop usually took me 4, maybe 5 hours with breaks. Even with the extra caution and slowing down, I should have been back by 1:30 at the latest. I hadn't stopped for long, not enough to lose that much time, but over an hour was just gone. I checked my tracking app. It showed the route, the distance, the elevation, all normal. But there was a big stretch with no data. Like, it hadn't logged anything between 2 GPS points. Just a straight line across a part of the trail that should have had several curves. The gap was about the same amount of time I was missing. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts. I didn't even want to think. Just sat there, gripping the wheel, watching the trees on the side of the road in case something showed up again. I didn't hike at night after that for a long time. I still go out during the day, but I stick to open trails, places with cell signal, places where people are nearby. I never smelled that burning plastic scent again, never saw those lights. But sometimes I'll be lying in bed and think about how quiet that thing was, how close it was, how it moved. Like it didn't care whether I saw it or not. Or maybe it did. I was up early that morning, prepping the weather balloon launch out by the outskirts of Amarillo, Texas. It was late April, just before dawn, and the air was cool but already holding the promise of heat for later. I work as a meteorologist for a small private research outfit, mostly routine stuff, sending balloons up to gather upper atmosphere data for storm forecasting. Nothing glamorous, just charts and numbers, but I liked the work. I liked being out where the sky was wide and empty. That day, the launch went pretty much like any other. We set up the balloon and the payload, sensors, radios, a tiny camera pointing down at the Earth. The whole thing was automated except for the launch and the tracking. I was standing next to the basket, watching it rise, the balloon getting smaller and smaller, drifting east with the morning wind. I had the radio scanner on, listening to air traffic chatter from nearby commercial flights. The balloon usually went up for an hour or two before bursting and falling back with a small parachute. After it was airborne and climbing steadily, I decided to pull out my binoculars and watch the horizon. The sunrise was coming fast now, painting everything pale gold. I noticed a tiny bright dot way up high, almost too small to be anything, but it wasn't moving like a plane or a bird. It just stayed there, still like it was watching. I figured it was probably a weather satellite or maybe a drone from a research group. But something about it didn't sit right. The light was a sharp silver, not blinking or flashing, no navigation lights, just a smooth, constant shine reflecting the sun. I adjusted the binoculars to get a better look. The object looked small, maybe a few feet wide, but too far away to be sure. It was hovering, almost perfectly motionless. No sound, no contrails, no blinking lights, no wings or rotors. Just this smooth, metallic glint suspended against the pale blue sky. I tapped the radio and called over to the air traffic controller frequency. "Hey, this is Amarillo Weather Balloon Launch. We're seeing a small object about 20,000 feet up, slightly north of our location. Do you have any traffic or reports on that?" Static filled the channel. Then a calm male voice came through. "No known traffic in your area at that altitude. Nothing on radar matching your description. Are you sure?" I told him what I was seeing and gave rough coordinates, but the response was basically, "Nothing on radar, no other flights nearby." I scanned around the spot again. The balloon was climbing higher now, almost 23,000 feet, heading into commercial airspace, but the object was still there, just beyond the balloon's altitude, maybe another 5,000 feet higher. I was tracking the balloon's telemetry on my laptop, watching the data scroll by. Then I noticed something odd. The balloon's GPS altitude was fluctuating a little more than usual. Nothing extreme, but it was dipping and rising in a way that seemed off for a stable ascent. I checked the camera feed from the balloon. Although it was pointing downward, it caught a little slice of sky above the horizon. At first, the metallic object wasn't in frame, but as the balloon drifted, it slowly edged into view. It was faint, but definitely there. A tiny shape, perfectly round, smooth, and gleaming. After a few minutes, the balloon's data showed an unexpected slowdown. The ascent rate dropped sharply, then leveled off. I looked outside, scanning the sky in that direction, but the object hadn't moved. A sudden wind gust rattled the equipment on the ground. The temperature was starting to climb, and the early morning calm shifted to a steady breeze. I pulled my jacket tighter as the sun came up fully. I was pretty sure I should have contacted someone else, FAA, military, or air traffic again, but I hesitated. The object wasn't doing anything threatening. It just hung there, like a silent watcher. I kept an eye on the screen and binoculars for another 20 minutes. The balloon started to descend slowly, as expected. The object remained still, its metallic surface catching the sun's rays in a way that made it look almost liquid. At one point, a small commercial jet crossed the horizon, heading west, well below the object. The plane's pilot didn't report anything unusual on the frequency I listened to. The balloon's descent was smooth until the altitude dropped below 15,000 feet. That's when the object suddenly vanished. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. No flash, no noise, no trail, just disappeared. I kept looking for it, scanning the sky for a good 5 minutes afterward. Nothing. The balloon's parachute deployed as planned, and it drifted gently down to the ground about 50 miles east of Amarillo. I drove out to retrieve it later that afternoon. Back in the office, I reviewed the flight data again, hoping to find something I'd missed. The altitude fluctuations during the ascent made me uneasy, like something had affected the balloon's buoyancy or pushed against it. But the sensors showed no signs of interference, no electromagnetic spikes, nothing unusual besides the weird changes in altitude. I sent the footage from the balloon's camera to my supervisor, cropped to just the sky portion where the object appeared, but the file looked grainy and distorted in that area. It almost looked like the camera sensor struggled to focus on the object, like light was bending oddly around it. That footage was gone by the next day. My supervisor told me it had been lost during transfer, an error in the server or the hard drive crash. I asked to see backups, but there were none. I checked in with the FAA the following week, asking if there were any unusual reports or radar logs around the time of the launch. They said everything was normal. No unknown objects detected, no flights near the balloon other than the scheduled commercial traffic. I haven't heard about anything like it since. No one else saw it. No one reported anything. The weather balloon program continued as usual, but I kept thinking about that smooth, hovering silver dot up there, watching the sky without a sound. Sometimes when I'm out looking at the clouds, I wonder if it's still up there somewhere, just waiting, completely still, out of sight. I was asleep when the knock came. It was just past midnight, a soft but urgent tapping on my front door. I'd been out late, tired, and didn't expect anyone, so when I opened the door, it took me a second to register the two men standing there. Black suits, dark glasses, even though it was night, and those expressionless faces you see in movies. They didn't introduce themselves, just said they needed to check my yard. I rubbed my eyes, half sure I was dreaming. My yard? What for? Routine inspection, one said, voice calm but firm. For safety concerns. I didn't want to be rude, but it felt off. I hesitated. They looked like government types, but no badges, no IDs. Still, something about the way they spoke made me think arguing wasn't a good idea. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The air was cold, heavy with fog rolling in from the nearby river, and the street lights were dim and flickering. The whole neighborhood was quiet. No cars, no sounds other than distant dogs barking. They moved fast. One of them started walking toward the backyard, eyes scanning. The other stayed by the door watching me. I tried to peek over the fence to see what they were looking at, but all I saw was the garden, my old shed, and a few bushes. After a few minutes, the one in the yard called me over. "Please stay inside," he said. I blinked. Why? Standard procedure. His tone was polite, but firm. I didn't argue. I locked the door again, feeling this weird knot in my stomach. I stood near the window and watched. The fog was thicker now, the dim light making everything blurry, like I was looking through a haze. They started pulling out what looked like bags from their coat pockets, heavy, black, like the kind used by forensic teams. One of them carefully approached something on the ground near the shed and started wrapping it up. I couldn't see what it was, but it looked small. They didn't say a word, just worked quickly, methodically. I wanted to call the police, but the moment I reached for my phone, the screen went black. No signal. Minutes passed like hours. The tension was unbearable. Then, just as silently as they'd arrived, the men in black walked back toward the front door. One nodded at me briefly, almost like a warning, then they left. Their car wasn't there when they arrived, and it wasn't there when they left. I stepped outside, my breath visible in the cold air. The yard looked normal, nothing disturbed except for a faint scuff mark near the shed. No footprints, no sign of whatever they'd bagged. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat down, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That night, I didn't sleep. The fog outside thickened and stayed until dawn. The next day, I checked my yard thoroughly. Nothing missing, nothing strange, but that scuff mark stayed. I don't know what they were looking for or why they took it, but I can't shake the feeling that something else was out there, watching me, waiting. And those two men, I've never seen them again. I was out on the ridge just after midnight, trying to get some long exposure shots of the Milky Way. I've been into astrophotography for a few years, mostly as a way to get away from everything and just focus on something bigger. This particular night in late October was clear, dry, and cold. The kind of night where the stars really pop. I drove up alone to a spot I'd been scouting for a while, about 20 minutes from my place in northern Vermont. There's a small dirt path leading to a clearing on the ridge, no streetlights for miles, and the sky was perfect. I set up my camera on the tripod, fiddled with the settings, 30-second exposures, ISO 1600, and started shooting. The ridge faced east, so I was trying to catch the movement of the stars trailing around Polaris. Everything looked normal at first. I was using an old film camera, a Canon AE1 with some expired Kodak Ektachrome that I found at a thrift store. I like shooting film sometimes because it forces you to slow down and be patient. After about an hour of shooting, I packed up and headed home. When I got back to my little apartment, I started developing the film in the darkroom on campus the next morning. I'm a photography major, so the department has a lab that's open pretty much 24/7. The darkroom is this cramped basement space with concrete walls and flickering fluorescent lights, plus all the usual chemicals and trays. I like it down there, quiet and oddly comforting. I pulled the first few strips out and hung them to dry. The star trails looked great. Then I noticed something weird on one roll. There were these sharp geometric streaks in the sky, like lines and angles, cutting across the star trails above the ridge. They weren't random. They looked deliberate, like patterns someone had drawn in light. The shapes didn't match anything I'd seen before, and they definitely weren't from airplanes or satellites. I looked at the negatives under the light again, blinking a few times, thinking maybe it was a scratch or a processing error. I decided to print a few of those frames and took the sheets into the enlarger. The shapes got even stranger when blown up. Triangles, diamonds, even what looked like a hexagon, all glowing faintly white, almost like light beams, but static and sharp-edged. The rest of the stars were blurred from the exposure, but these shapes stayed sharp and rigid. I showed the prints to my friend Claire, who's also in photography. She said it looked like some kind of light graffiti or maybe a glitch in the film. I agreed it was probably a weird artifact, but it stuck with me. I went back to the ridge the next night, but the sky was cloudy and I didn't get a chance to try again. A few days later, I went to the darkroom to get more prints made. The room was empty except for the janitor, this older guy named Mr. Carver. I said hi, and he looked at me with a strange expression, like he was holding something back. I didn't think much of it. When I reached into my locker to grab the negatives and prints, I noticed some of the prints were missing, the ones with the geometric streaks. Not just one or two, but the entire set. I asked Mr. Carver if he'd seen them. He hesitated, and then said, "Some men came by here a couple of nights ago after hours. They were wearing suits. Black suits. Real official looking." I nodded slowly, but he went on. "They asked me some strange questions about lights, about long exposures, about capturing things that weren't supposed to be captured. I didn't know what to tell them." I froze for a second. What did they want? They just wanted to know if anyone had been down here, taking photos of the sky. Said something about too much light and things better left unseen. I don't think they liked the idea of people poking around. I thanked him and left, but the feeling in my gut didn't go away. I kept checking the lab every day after that, but no new prints showed up. My negatives were still there, untouched. Then, one night, while walking back from the campus library, I saw a black sedan parked under a street lamp a block from my apartment. There were two men inside, dressed in dark suits. They didn't get out. As I passed, their headlights briefly flickered, and I swear I caught a glimpse of one of them watching me. I hurried home and locked every door and window. Over the next week, strange things kept happening. My phone battery would drain fast, even though I barely used it. I'd catch flickers of movement outside my window, but when I looked, there was nothing. Once, while driving home late, my headlights briefly dimmed and then returned to normal. I stopped going to the ridge for a while. I didn't tell anyone else, not even Claire. One afternoon, I got an email on my school account. No subject. Just a sentence. "You've seen too much light lately." It was from an address I didn't recognize. I replied asking who it was, but got no answer. That night, I thought I saw a shadow standing outside my apartment. When I looked closer, it vanished. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the streetlight. Eventually, I moved all my negatives and prints to a safer place, just in case. I never saw those men in black again, but I always felt like someone was watching, waiting. I still don't know what those shapes were on my film, or why those men showed up, but I stopped photographing the night sky after that. It didn't feel right anymore. I was walking home late one night, just minding my own business. The street was quiet, a little foggy, and the kind of night where everything feels a bit off, but you can't quite say why. As I got near the end of the block, I noticed a black car parked by the curb. It wasn't the car itself that caught my attention. It was what was inside. There were two men sitting in the front seats, both wearing black suits and those old-fashioned top hats. At first, I thought maybe it was some kind of costume or weird prank, but then I looked closer. Their faces weren't faces. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin, like someone had erased their faces entirely. I froze for a second, then kept walking, faster this time. I tried not to look back, but curiosity got the better of me after a few steps. When I glanced over my shoulder, the car was gone. No lights, no engine sound, no tire marks, nothing. Just the empty street under the fog. I don't know who those men were or what that car was doing there. I've never seen anything like it before or since. It's been bothering me ever since.